quiet June evening in a small town saw off the day. The sun was rapidly rolling over the horizon on the sky surface of the dawn, painting the last rays of the roofs of gray brick high-rise buildings. The rains had recently fallen, and the evenings were still cool. In the morning, a thick, wet fog hung over the city. While it was getting cold outside the windows, a tall, statuesque woman was walking down the street of the still warm city. She was in her 30s. She had a figure that would make anyone envious. Emily was pretty, but her clothes were a bit plain. Well, as they should be for a mom of many children. A job as a cleaner at a large construction firm was a lifesaver. Emily did not receive education, was engaged exclusively in the family. She married for the first time at 18, got pregnant while still in school from the most handsome and athletic guy. Everyone envied her, as well as him. Emily was considered the most beautiful girl in school. And Damien was the most eligible. How many girls had shed bitter tears when they became a couple and kissed for the first time in front of everyone at the school disco in 9th grade? How many boys had tried to fight for Emily's heart, challenging Damien to a duel, but he was stronger than the others every time and made it clear to everyone, "I won't give it to anyone." Eventually they got married. A year later, Eva was born. 2 years later, Damien was born, and after 3 years, Damien got tired of supporting his family. I wanted to go out, vacation with friends. Neither Emily nor Damien went to school. Work was hard. He was tired of both the marriage and his beautiful wife, who had not gained a gram, having given birth to 2 children. Emily was also too young, did not immediately realize that she was not ready for a serious family relationship. She was tired of carrying the whole household and 2 kids on her own, tired of being alone all day long. It was hard on her. As it happened, Emily's parents died young, and she barely remembered them. Damien, on the other hand, had been taken from the orphanage when he was an adult. He didn't get along with his foster family, so he didn't expect any help from them. Damien started drinking, cheating. He was constantly getting kicked out of one job or another. And Emily was always worrying and crying about it. There was nowhere else to go. When Emily was getting married, her grandmother insisted that the girl should take up her mind, have an abortion, enroll in school, and leave the wrong fiancé. What's there to do when all you have in your head is romance and love? Emily came to her grandmother in tears. "He beats me, cheats, does not work, all the time drunk. I don't want the children to see this. Can we move in with you at least for a while?" Grandma was a hard person, and I told you, "Emily, you should have listened to me. If you'd asked me to move in, you'd be dragging your sons and daughters with you. What do I need them for? No, I won't. You made your own decision. You didn't give a damn about my opinion. Now you have to deal with it yourself." Emily realized it was useless to persuade her grandmother. Her parents had died years ago in an accident. Her grandmother was Emily's mom's mother. Emily's father, on the other hand, Sandra had disliked from the beginning. The fact that Emily looked so much like him only made it worse. Her grandmother raised her because she was ashamed to give her only granddaughter to Commordage, but to love and spoil her. No, there was no such thing. It was the last time they would see each other. Emily was to live in a house with Damien and the children, or rather, in a rented apartment. Damien rented it cheaply from a friend. Emily suffered for another year, endured beatings and drunkenness. Then she was courted by a man twice her age. Emily had nowhere to go, so she gave in to his advances. His name was Eden Stately, tall, with dark hair, beautiful deep-set blue eyes and a neat black nose. Nice-looking. Intelligent. He taught physics at the local college, held an adjunct position, and made a good living. Emily didn't go to him, though there was no great love, just desperation. I wanted a better future for the children, that they had a good, caring father. Isn't that Emily's maternal happiness? They got back together. She was officially divorced from Damien and dreamed of forgetting him like a bad dream. She thought their life would be like a fairy tale now, but it wasn't. Eden didn't like Emily very much either. He'd spent his whole life working. He even got his doctorate, but he stayed at his favorite college. He believed that vocation trumped money and everything else. Now that he was over 40 and time was running out, Eden decided to act as always, pragmatic and balanced. He found a woman with attractive forms, a statuesque beauty. In principle, she was not stupid and good-looking. Besides, she had already given birth, so she could do it again. He just wanted to procreate. And once they got together, he did everything he could to get Emily pregnant. She decided to give in. After all, why not? She's married. Let them have a child together. Eden was kind, generous, but rather pedantic. The toothpaste tube in his house had to be more than just closed. It had to lie parallel to the edge of the shelf. There was perfect cleanliness all around, and all Emily's things had to be laid flat. Otherwise, Eden would start correcting things and grumbling about how messy everything was. She was willing to oblige him in his little whims and oddities, though. After Damien, Eden seemed the perfect man. So Emily gave birth to his daughter, Darcy. Then a year and 4 months later, a second daughter, Kate, was born. They looked just like their handsome father. In fact, they took the best of their mother's good looks from her. The girls were real beauties, one better than the other. Eva was different from them. She had her father's looks, blonde hair, big blue eyes, and dimples on her cheeks. Beautiful, no doubt, but different. All the children got along with each other, no matter who was their father. Darcy and Kate knew they had another daddy, but they didn't think of him. It was Eden who had become a real father to all 4 of them. He managed to find an approach to each one and saw each one as an individual. Eden adored children. That's why he became a teacher. Emily appreciated how warmly he treated what were essentially other people's children, and she turned a blind eye to his coldness and aloofness toward her. They both realized that love had never been formed between them. It was just a union between 2 people when Emily was already 33. She realized she was pregnant again. We already have 4. I don't want to have another baby. The term is still small. I'm going to abort. Can I do it now? I'm not young. After all, I'm not planning any more children, Emily pondered. Eden posed, yes, I worked for months to get you pregnant again. Are you out of your mind at all? What abortion? This is my child, my flesh and blood. Are you going to kill him? Oh, come on, I already have 4, Emily objected. So do I. I'm providing for them, and I'll be able to take care of the 5th, Eden countered. The 4th birth had been hard on her. Doctors advised her not to give birth again, or to have a good treatment. At first, Emily decided enough was enough. So she didn't get treatment. She just got periodic checkups. I knew you'd be against it, said her husband. An argument ensued. Emily said she was going to abort anyway, but she didn't dare to do it. She was afraid of being alone, afraid of Eden's anger, and the procedure would take determination too. She was scared to have the operation. The doctor said that in her case it was better to give birth. An abortion could carry serious consequences too. You understand, I always wanted a son, and now I just want a son. Emily, for God's sake, please, Eden begged. And she stayed. The pregnancy had been easy. The labor was easy too, easier than all the previous ones. Their long-awaited son was born. They named him Vincent. 6 months later, Eden was gone. Died on the job of a stroke. Emily was left alone with the children. On the first 2, she received nothing from her first husband, as he was successfully drunk somewhere on the outskirts of the city. The survivor's pension and child support covered the basic expenses, but school was dragging too much. And not just school, Liz went dancing. She needed costumes and shoes, which were expensive. Damien was in the soccer team. Darcy and Kate played piano. In addition, everyone was in school, which required uniforms, textbooks. Little Vincent was sick all the time. As soon as he turned 1.5, Emily put him in the nursery and got a job at the store. But there were shortages every now and then. The goods were affordable for the whole family. Often their drunken son came there in the middle of the night, took the goods and did not even write down, and the vendors always had to make restitution out of their own pockets. Eventually, Emily quit her job and was lucky enough to see an ad on the door of a huge office building. The cleaning lady there made more money than the store clerk. Besides, the workload was less. Clean the tiles and floor with professional tools and sit back. Emily was warmly received. True, not all. There were women in the office who considered themselves superior to others, and the cleaner for them in general a person of the second class. Emily was calm and polite. There was no escape. The head of the firm is young and ambitious. However, the employees said that things are not going well. At the beginning of the year, they had to cut some of their staff because of the slump in sales. People were worried about their jobs. but Justin promised that he could keep the company afloat. Evil tongues said that Eugene, the founder of the company, knew how to run the business, and as soon as he handed over to his only son, everything fell apart. But that's not what happened. No one knew that the slow decline of the firm started under his father's management when his son, this one studying abroad at the Business Institute, joined the firm. He made many suggestions for modifications. There was a need to keep up with the times, to move to the next level, take over the internet space and grow the business there. Eugene resisted this for several years, and the company's revenue continued to decline. That's when he stepped down, handing everything over to his son. He wasn't old enough. Everything new and modern wasn't easy for him. He needed someone who understood the internet to lead the company. Eugene decided to hand everything over to his son, but he did not believe in the success of the event. The only way for my son to step up is to make a serious investment. Besides, we need new horizons. Have you been friends with Poirot and Liz for a long time? If you were to marry, your union would help save my life's work. But think about it. Her father would make investments, introduce you to the right people, and you could open up an overseas market for us. You can't get in without connections. You realize our firm isn't popular enough to trade out of the country, but we could cover the regions of the near abroad if we could also save on personnel. You said the internet would provide us with that. It would be wonderful. His father's words hurt Justin. He knew how much he cared about his child, and he had been preparing for the presidency all his life. Before that, he had earned 2 college degrees at home and abroad. He was ready to take over to replace his father, but the company was in an unprofitable state. He stood at the helm of the sinking ship and began to implement his reforms. At first, the staff perceived Justin's leadership with skepticism. What does he know? Young, inexperienced, and even with foreign quirks in his head. However, 2 higher educations were received not for nothing, not for a checkmark. Justin was really learning to absorb knowledge. He wanted to become a worthy replacement for his father, but not at the cost of his own happiness. No, I can't do that. Work is work, but getting married to improve the firm's business is overkill. I don't like Liz, she's just a friend to me, even, I'd say, an acquaintance. The father shrugged. Whatever you want, it's in your hands. But the son was worried. He decided that if it was fate, it was worth a try. He hadn't spoken to Liz in years. What if she'd changed? Maybe she'd changed. What if he fell in love with her? After all, her parents are the model of a strong, happy family. Maybe she'll make a good wife. To him, they met. Justin took her to a restaurant. The girl was happy to see him. She picked the restaurant herself, the most fancy one. I don't like cheap eateries. I'm used to always having only the best, she smiled. And in that moment, Justin realized he still didn't like her at all. She wasn't his person, a blank slate. It was only going to get worse from here. He decided that he would try to stay with her longer. What if he jumped to conclusions hastily, wrongly? What if she just wasn't showing what was inside her? Liz loved partying, didn't shy away from humiliating her friends, asserting herself, dividing all people into the upper class and the rabble. She laughed loudly. She was brash and pompous. Her mom was different. Justin realized he had much more in common with her parents than he did with Liz herself. His father prodded, "Pay attention to the girl. Take a good look at her." What kind of a beautiful couple would you make Justin? Unfortunately, was used to listening to his father and didn't refuse him. Realizing that such a union would really pull the company together, allow it to flourish, there was no other girl Justin would like at that moment. And Liz started calling every now and then. Apparently, Justin was a very good match for her. She'd fallen in love and confessed it to him while drunk, and she got drunk a lot. And Justin didn't like it. The company's fortunes gradually improved. The new owner managed to stabilize the situation, but not without downsizing, and people began to worry. However, not every company can afford to keep a large team that does nothing. It was a forced measure. Gradually, Liz became a regular guest at Justin's house. He treated her in a friendly way, and that only turned her on more, making her fall in love with him. She hadn't known rejection before, and Justin acted like he wasn't interested in her. Liz was different around him. Even her dad noticed. "You're on your own, Justin. It's up to you." but I'd like to put in a good word for my daughter. My opinion is worth a lot." "You know," said Pete. "What do you mean?" "Liz has never once asked her mother to teach her how to cook. I thought you said you liked cabbage pies, so she went to school. It's like Liz has been replaced. She's in love. Justin, really. Which means she's depending on you. And the first thing I want to say is, please don't hurt her. I can't help her with that. The thing is, it's out of my hands, it's out of your life. There are rarely situations where something is out of my control. I'm used to controlling, managing. But here, it looks like you're the only one in control." Justin could see that Poirot was nervous, carefully choosing his words and wanting to get the point across. "I don't know what you want. Liz is just a friend to me, and if she has other feelings for me, I can step aside. I don't have a goal to hurt or..." Pete sighed. "No, I wouldn't want that. I mean, she's windy, and she's in love. I'd like a son-in-law like you. I'll tell you that. But I don't love her," Justin said honestly. "Why be so secretive?" He tried to take his father's advice and look her over, but the more he looked, the less he liked her. That's no basis for a family. "Love isn't the point," Pete continued. "What's important is that people want to create a new unit of society. I'll tell you a secret. My wife loved me very much, and I got married. Do I love her? I respect her. I appreciate her. I care for her. But the love was not, and is not. Do I regret marrying her? No, of course not. It's the best decision of my life to let a woman love me and start a family, and you'll be happy and content. After all, you can find love somewhere else. But if you have to," he winked conspiratorially. Justin realized that Liz was like his father. "I'll think about your advice," he said diplomatically. "Think about it. Besides, without my help, your firm will continue to teeter on the brink of collapse. And one day it will, believe me. It's the way things are now, you see. It's politics, I'll help you. No problem. It'll be an added bonus for you. And not only will you keep your company, but you'll be the head of mine. One day you'll have 2 kids. For example, one will take over your father's company, the other will take my chair. And you'll have a happy and secure old age. I'm not old anymore. I want to travel, to get away from business." Justin shook his head. He had planned their life for years to come until they were old, and the number of grandchildren was already determined. He said nothing more, ending the conversation. But from that moment on, everything changed. Liz began to intrude into his life with insolence. She moved her belongings, duplicated her keys. When Justin said he wasn't okay with it, she threw a tantrum. "You tamed me, and we're responsible for the ones we tame. Why do you keep calling me? Why do you keep coming? You gave me hope. It's your fault I can't live without you." Justin's guilt was pretty well developed. He gave in to a woman's tears, and now they've been together for a year. Justin honestly said at the time that he had no feelings, but Liz was fine with that. After a while, however, she started demanding more attention, complaining and claiming that Justin didn't love her and wasn't affectionate with her, and then she apologized. This was how they lived day after day. He had felt increasingly disgusted with her over the last 4 months, couldn't even bring himself to touch her. It all spiraled out of control. He was taken in. He let it happen. He wanted what was best for him. He thought it would be lovey-dovey. But he didn't love her, and he couldn't stand it. In the end, she was angry, but she wouldn't leave. She said she wouldn't let go. And Justin just lived, as best he could under the circumstances. Liz often came to his workplace and acted like a hostess. Her father was going to contribute to the company, become a shareholder. Besides, Liz acted like a hostess everywhere she went. She'd been spoiled, raised to own her life. Now it was too late to re-educate her. Seeing Emily for the first time, Justin smiled, thinking she was too good to be a cleaning lady. Decided she must be dumb as a cork, since she has no brains or beauty and has to hold such a position. But when I got to know her better, I realized it's not that simple. Just a life situation. She was exceptionally wise. It was interesting to have a few words with her. It even felt like she knew the answers to every question. Justin liked her, but of course he didn't think about getting closer. It wasn't about that at all. The idea of using Emily as a lightning rod had come to him spontaneously. He didn't have the courage to just break off the relationship, and that would lead to a serious fight between the families. Therefore, Justin decided to make Liz finally dump him on her own. She was very arrogant and proud, and she definitely wouldn't stand for cheating. "Emily, I need your help," he said suddenly. Emily looked up and looked questioningly at the chief, stopping to dust the windowsill. Justin laid out his idea to her in a straightforward, enthusiastic way. "What's the big deal?" Emily didn't understand. "I can't. There are too many parties interested in our union. If I break it off, I'll be guilty, and there will be serious consequences. If I don't, well, you'd still be guilty. You're going to cheat, even if it's not for real, but that's different. Liz's dad will understand, man to man. In fact, he's the one who said you should marry for profit and make love on the side. So there's no moral high ground in that family. It's perfect." "Okay, but why me?" Emily persisted. "You're beautiful." I saw Liz looking at you with envy. I never would have guessed that, Emily marveled. Liz was well groomed from head to toe, about 8 years younger than she was. Was she jealous of her? A maintenance worker with 5 kids. That night, Justin was defeated. She turned him down. But a couple days later, she had to say yes. The boss kept trying to persuade her. Emily needed an advance. Damien was very sick. "I'll give you the money without that," Justin said. He didn't want to get his own way. It was wrong and dirty. "Fine, I'll help you without the advance," Emily replied. After all, Liz was the one who was annoying everyone in the office, walking around, giving orders, humiliating everyone. It would be easier to breathe without her. Justin and Emily discussed the details, and on the appointed day, when Liz arrived at her fiancé's house, they watched carefully through the cameras. As soon as Liz went upstairs and her footsteps were heard, Justin pulled Emily to him and began to hug her. Actually, he liked the kiss. It felt good, and he didn't even want to stop. Emily was surprised at her reaction too. She felt so sweet from his lips touching hers. It had started out as a play, a farce. But when Liz made them wince with her scream, they both realized they didn't want to interrupt. Emily blushed and ran out of the office to the loud sound of a slap. Liz snickered, first yelling, then crying. When she came out, Justin found Emily in the back room. He went over to her, put his arm around her. Tears glistened faintly in her eyes. She suddenly realized that she liked him, and it was excruciatingly painful to realize that he would never kiss her again. "Thank you. You saved my life. I was willing to lose everything just to not be with her." Liz had already planned a wedding with her father. "Did you ask her to marry you?" Emily asked, realizing that he still had his arms around her. No, Justin smiled broadly. "Even that happens. I got married without me," she smiled. Justin walked out, leaving his dad alone. Soon Pete called him. "Did you hear that Liz caught you with the cleaning lady?" he said calmly. Justin was wildly nervous. This man could easily have stuffed him in the trunk, driven him to the woods, and buried him. "Yeah, that's what happened. I don't care. I've already put together the paperwork. Business is business. Your wedding is part of the business deal. I talked to my daughter. Liz is fine with the wedding. She loves you. She's just wondering if she'll forgive you. But she's willing to try anyway. I don't care what's between you two. But you're going to have all the heads, all the bigwigs at your party. It's going to be quite an event. You walk in wearing a tie, you smile for business. And if you want, you can file for divorce the next day. Your father would be thrilled with my offer." "How about you?" Justin sighed heavily, as if he were being dragged to a place he didn't want to go. "I need to think about it. Let's do it at night." "That's enough. Calm down," she said, and slapped him. Apparently for not loving her, she cried and left. How he regretted starting the relationship in the first place. 6 days before the wedding, Justin got an early morning call from the hospital. "We have your father, Justin." He was brought in by ambulance. Justin was shaken. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. "It's a stroke." Justin rushed to the hospital. Soon Liz and her father Pete arrived there. "You're here too," Justin wondered. "How could we not be? Your father and I planned your wedding. I'm sorry it turned out this way. He's been going through a lot. Takes everything personally. You can't do that." Justin felt guilty in front of everyone. He listened to his father, and for nothing. He should have looked for other options to save the company from the beginning. Why had he listened to his dad in the first place? But if he had listened to him, he should have gone through with it. Thoughts swarmed in his head, stinging like wasps. He sat in the hallway all day. Pete had gone instead to an important meeting where a favorable agreement was to be made. Justin was a total wreck. It was like that the next day and the day after that. He was allowed to see his father, but he needed help after his stroke and couldn't speak. He couldn't speak at all. Seeing him in that state made Justin very anxious. He couldn't think. It was Poirot who took care of the work and the cases. Look what that Pete is doing without you. He's brought his Volan here. He's locked himself in your office, digging through files all day long. I don't care if Dad could die. Doctors don't make any guarantees. You don't live long after a stroke. I don't know what to do. I don't know. To go on living. The company still cannot raise to the previous level without serious investment. Maybe Dad was right and Poirot is our only salvation. Justin changed his mind. Now it looked like he just screwed it up. He should have listened to his father in the first place. Justin walked into the room with irritation on his face. Either come out and do everything on your own or let me work properly. I'm not a boy either, he said sharply. Justin stepped into your situation, dropped all his business, and I'm doing yours. He postponed the wedding, and a couple of lucrative contracts for me fell through. Don't you know what I'm even wasting my time for right now? If you and Liz don't even see each other anymore, I've done enough for your firm, Justin, to earn my signature. And in the future, when I become a shareholder, if I become a shareholder, because nobody seems to be giving me any guarantees. I'll have it anyway, he continued. Justin realized that Pete was right. All their arrangements had been lip service. The wedding was postponed. Justin even withdrew the application, and all that was real was Poirot's help. It was real. It was in the company accounts. I'm sorry, you're right. I'll make a power of attorney for you. Thank you for all you do for us during this difficult time, Justin replied. 2 days later, Justin made everything official. And a week later, he found out that half of his employees were looking for work. What's going on? Why are you laying people off? Justin asked. The thing is, they just sit there and just get paid. For what? My man replaced 5 of your slackers. The company wouldn't be profitable if you squandered money like that, Pete replied. Justin waved his hand. His father started talking, and that's what was important. However, 2 more weeks later, when Justin arrived at the office, he didn't recognize him. A security guard stood at the door and asked for identification before letting him inside. I'm the owner of this firm. What's going on anyway? He asked, pulling his passport out of his pocket. Instead of Emily, another woman, unfamiliar to Justin, sat at the desk. Of the old employees, there was only a lawyer who had come in relatively recently. Now the thought crept into Justin's head that he was a spy that Poirot had picked up. Where are my staff? What's going on? Justin asked. Liz came out of the room adjacent to the principal's office. Her father was sitting in a chair, glancing at Justin with a frown. They quit. The paycheck didn't work out, Liz said. Where's my cleaning lady? Justin asked. He knew she had nowhere to go. I fired her, Pete said. Justin didn't smile at the joke. I suspect that might have been the case. I left the company, and that's what it's become. Is there anything else I need to know about? He asked. I suspect it won't be the last surprise. Yeah, here you go. I had no idea things were so bad, Pete replied. Justin began to read the documents, and after a careful study, he realized that the prosecutor's office had nailed the company to the wall, so much so that he would owe money, and he'd probably go to jail. There were such figures, such articles, that Justin couldn't believe his eyes. How did you do it, Pete? I mean, everything was fine when I left the firm. There may have been some delinquencies, but they were minimal, within 3 months. And I couldn't have had those delinquencies, Justin said, puzzled. It was sleight of hand and no fraud. Justin familiarized himself with another document. This is the only way out for you. You'll get away with it. He read a prepared agreement that completely absolved him of liability. In essence, it offered to sell the company retroactively for nothing. Poirot's buyer, Liz, marveled. Liz stood behind her father's shoulder with her arms folded across her chest. What did you think? Stupid. That it was okay to mix me with dirt, to humiliate me. No, sweetheart. You're gonna pay for this performance. I know you just didn't know how to get rid of me. And I, a fool in love, would do anything for you. Your company is the compensation for my moral damage. Do you understand? Justin looked at Liz, at her father. There was no one to consult, and it was dangerous to talk to his father about it now. In his condition, nervousness was contraindicated. The news of losing the company would be devastating to him. He signed it. Liz stared at him, not sure what was going on. By her calculations, he shouldn't have been smiling, but rather hysterical, sobbing and begging for a chance. Her feelings didn't go away so quickly. There was still hope in her soul. "What? Are you scared? Are you having fun? You've lost everything. You lost your father's company," she said venomously. Justin looked at her dyed hair, at her long, unnatural nails, at the bright makeup that added to her age. She had a fashionable, haggard thinness that he didn't find attractive at all. But most importantly, she had so much anger inside. "I'm glad I won't be seeing you again. Liz, it was Dad's fault." Of course it was his idea. Our alliance, and he trusted. "Pete, why did you listen to him? Why would I do that? And I'm guilty, of course, and I'm guilty to you too. But you outdid me. I really wanted to connect with you. I really thought we could be a couple, but we're completely different." Liz had tears in her eyes. "You didn't try hard enough. You didn't try at all. I was the one who tried my best to be a good match for you," she said through her tears. "But now I don't owe you anything. I'm done." "I signed the papers, Eugene." Justin handed the papers to his father-in-law and walked out in silence, closing the door of the office he'd thought of as his own since he was a boy. He had once flown in here in a whirlwind, happy to see his father, and he was happy. He was always happy to see his son. He always put things off if Vincent came. Sometimes the son would spend hours in the corner there. Dad used to even have a separate couch and table where he spent time keeping company. Eugene didn't have much free time for Justin, so he'd bring him along and they'd socialize between errands, meetings, and gatherings. Walking out of the building, Justin involuntarily brushed away a tear. It had all ended so stupidly. Coming to his father, he looked at him sadly, not knowing how to tell him about everything. "What, son? Talk, don't be afraid. They give me so much medicine that it is no longer scary," he spoke slowly, but already smiled. Poirot took the company away. Justin couldn't help himself. He told all the details, how things were with Liz, and how much he didn't want to be with her. His father smiled. "That's it, son." Then it was time to move on. The company was unprofitable. Let's be honest, getting attached to a building is silly. Yes, we spent many years there, but maybe fate is giving us a chance to start something else. You know, I, for one, love cars. Maybe you and I should start our own cab service around town. I love our town, its roads, its people. I even love the traffic, to be honest. I'm tired of management. That's why I quit. I'd had enough of that game. Let Poirot play it out. Let's not be greedy. So calm down, son. I can't cancel this day as a holiday, but you can have a drink tonight, said the father. Justin talked to his father for a long time. After that, he went home to rest. He had to look for another job. The next 4 weeks were spent looking. The company was gone. His savings were rapidly running out. Justin tried to get a job in the city, but he kept getting rejected. Pete did his best. He blacklisted him, threatened the big firms, intimidated them. Tired of trying unsuccessfully to find a job, Justin went to his former office to see Pete. "You took the firm away from us." "What? Not enough. Dad's still sick. We need money for his treatment. A man's life depends on it. Leave us alone. I gave you everything already," Justin said. "You think I've forgotten how my daughter cried in front of me because of you?" Pete said hatefully. Justin didn't know what to do. I guess the only thing left to do was to move. Only his father. But Poirot's power had its limits. Justin turned to leave, but Pete called out to him, "If you want, I'll take you here. We don't have enough good people. I fired a lot of people while I was cleaning the company of you. Do your best. If you do a good job, I'll make sure you're off the blacklist. This is my punishment to you for my daughter." Justin didn't care. He was already tired of looking for work and counting pennies, saving for everything, so he took it. And the next day he was already out. No one signed a contract with him. Now the company was saving on tax deductions. Officially it worked only 4 people. Poirot made his own. Justin worked without a day off for a whole month, filling in for both the storekeeper and other workers. When it came time for payroll, the accountant shrugged. There was no order. Sorry, Justin went to see Poirot in person, but the latter pretended as if he didn't know him. "Did he work for us? Where's the contract? I'll call the prosecutor's office. I'll complain," Justin said. "And I'll say you stole property from us worth more than your salary. The prosecutor is an old friend of mine. We go to the bathhouse with him on weekends. So if you go to see him, Say hello to him, Poirot replied. Justin was furious. Money was getting scarce. Hopelessness was eating away at him. What to do? It was time to take his father home. There was no more money to keep him in the clinic. But who would look after him? Who would care for him, and who would work? He was really tired. Walked into the bar, remembering everything that had happened. Justin piled on the booze, ignoring the appetizer. As he left the place, he felt like he'd had too much to drink. It was late fall outside. The trees were bare and leafless, and the puddles were frozen underfoot. Justin slipped on one of them and hit the back of his head. "This feels so good," he said. Felt scared. Tired of working for a month without a single day off. Hearing promises of a good raise and going for nothing in the end. But what kind of man is this Poirot? How could he do this to people? With these thoughts, Justin fell into a troubled sleep right there in the middle of the deserted street. He dreamed of Emily. He remembered that she had been kicked out, and he wanted to help find her, to talk to her. Opening his eyes, he remembered that he had fallen asleep right there in the street. He was blinded by a bright light, and it was as if someone was leaning over him, an angel. A little girl with a bunch of red hair and wings. What about my father without me? And why did I get drunk? Fell asleep to death, Justin realized. "Mom, your uncle is awake now. Can I turn on the cartoons?" shouted the angel loudly. Justin shook his head and saw that he was in a small room on an old iron bed behind a cheap striped mattress. Emily walked into the room. Justin didn't realize how he had ended up in her house. "What did you think, Apostle Peter?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest. "Is it okay to get so drunk?" "Barely dragged you home," she said. "And why the girl in the angel costume?" "They're trying to give me a heart attack. You should have dressed her up as a devil." Just then another little girl came running into the room, very much like the first one. Sandra was dressed as a devil with horns. Justin flinched and the girl laughed and ran out of the room. "Well, stop scaring your uncle," Emily smiled. Justin got up from the bed. "These are my daughters, Darcy and Kate Tace. Were 1-year-olds. They had a masquerade ball at school. They were allowed to choose any costumes they wanted, so they did. Scaring people is their favorite thing to do." The woman gave Justin tea after he took a shower. She said she was coming back from the market in the evening, where she'd gotten a job after quitting her job at the farm. Found Justin on the ground, picked him up and brought him home. "You were talking all about your dad yesterday. How is he?" "Better. But he still needs care, and I don't know where to go." "You wouldn't believe how many stupid things I've done." Justin told her everything. Everything from the beginning to yesterday, when he'd realized that working for Poirot was another mistake he'd made. "Well, you're just confused. It's nothing. I didn't get kicked out easily either, did I? They didn't pay my wages for a month and a half. They threatened to blacklist me. I left without making a fuss, went to the market, selling, helping to clean and set up the goods. It's terribly cold, but tea and warm clothes keep me warm. I don't know what it's like in the winter." Liz did her best. She's got the social services on us. We're on their radar now. She also found my landlady, who I'd been renting from for years, and made her kick us out. She put some pressure on us. We ended up finding this place. Justin noticed that they lived in a very poor house. Their shower was homemade. The walls were shabby and in a terrible state. "I'm sorry. It's all my fault," he said. "Yes," Emily said, but then she smiled. "But I'm not angry. I helped what seemed like a good man get rid of a bad one, and you'll get back on your feet. Dad's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay. Just don't drink anymore." "I'm not a drinker." "Don't think so. I've never been that drunk. Just circumstances." Suddenly, he had a great idea. "Listen, how much are you paying for this tuition?" The woman gave him a figure. "What if you moved in with us? We have a very big house. Dad bought it. I hope to have a big family. It was a birthday present. I've got an apartment downtown, a few cars. I'll have to sell some things, but I'll keep the house. I don't live in it. We'll move. We'll each have our own room. It's like a castle, 2 floors. 7 bedrooms, each floor has its own bathroom and toilet. There's even a separate room with a bathroom and toilet. I'm planning to move my father there. You'll help me get him out, and I'll get a job at the market, make some money. We'll get out together. I'll pay what I can. I'll bring food to the house. Since we have to survive, let's join forces. I can't afford a nurse right now, and if I'm with my father, I can't earn money. I won't be able to find a good place now. That's my only choice. Or do I give Dad to a specialized clinic that treats lonely old people? It was a crazy idea, but Emily didn't say no. She just asked for time to think about it, to consult with the children. The kids said they wanted to live in a big house. So a few days later, Eugene had a whole bunch of caregivers. The children ran to him every now and then, asking if he needed anything, and Emily took care of him. Justin worked all day at the market, bringing home money not much, but enough to live on. Emily cooked dinner. Justin talked about his day. Slowly but surely they began to grow closer, and Eugene got better soon enough. Emily read different techniques for recovering from a stroke, making him do simple exercises, treating him with herbs. After 6 months, Eugene didn't seem to need a caregiver anymore, and he even had some savings. "Son, let's start a business," he suggested again. "A construction business." "No, I don't want that anymore. Remember when I told you about the cab business? I want to drive around town and just give people rides," he said, smiling. So they sold an old and very expensive foreign car and bought 3 cab cars. One of the company's laid off employees, a loyal and devoted family friend, started working with him. Justin registered as an entrepreneur, got all the permits, and became a businessman again. Profits were small at first, of course, but soon they were able to expand. They bought another car, hired. George sat at the kitchen table and smoked one cigarette after another near the open window. It had been freezing since mid-January, but the cold penetrating from the street into the apartment did not bother the man. He was in such a state that such trifles did not bother him now. Outside the window, a gray, dull dawn was dawning. The meeting with the notary at 11. There was still plenty of time. Vanessa slept sweetly in the bedroom, wrapped in warm blankets. Unlike George, she was clearly happy about the whole situation, and that was strangely repulsive to him. Until a couple months ago, George had thought this girl was perfect. Beautiful, determined, ambitious, smart. She's got a way with words. When necessary, she'll make a joke. When necessary, she'll put you in your place. And most importantly, gentle and loving. A real woman. Next to such men feel strong, necessary. Not like Madison. Eric Madison. George's heart ached again. His wife, after all. She wasn't a stranger to him at all. Despite Vanessa's presence, despite everything that had been going on lately. Madison. Charlotte. Queen Madison. They met while they were still students. The girl was a finance and economics major. George was a law student. No, the guy never particularly dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Since childhood, he read a lot. He especially liked stories about relationships. Love, passion, hate, fear. It was interesting to unravel the intentions of the characters, to speculate about why they acted in this or that way. No wonder that his essays on literature were the most profound and interesting. The teacher even read out some fragments in front of the class. George also drew a lot. His desk drawer was full of sketchbooks, sketches, all kinds of drawings. Fantastic creatures, courageous warriors, just unusual ornaments. Drawing was soothing, calming, and time-consuming. George himself did not understand how it happened. He sat down at the table to do algebra. He distracted himself for a minute to finish drawing another character, and that was it. He fell out of reality. He came to his senses, and only then realized with surprise that he had spent several hours drawing. George was clearly a creative person, but his parents were not happy about it. Mother and father, it seems, agreed only in one thing. Both believed that the son needs a serious profession. Did they agree on anything? And, well, the father had some connections. And so George ended up at a prestigious law school. True, he wasn't the least bit interested in his studies. But what can you do? Parents said that you must study, otherwise you will not achieve anything in life. And George was used to believe his parents and obey them. But at university, he met Madison. George noticed her during his freshman year. She was interesting looking. Not beautiful? No. But there was something aristocratic about her. They didn't call her Queen Madison for nothing. Snow-white skin, beautiful intelligent eyes of the darkest shade, shiny black hair, always smoothly styled, clear cheekbones, a nose with a slight hump and a confident line of lips, and most importantly, regal posture and sharp, but still surprisingly graceful movements. Even later, George learned that Madison as a child attended a ballet studio, which hated with all his soul. Parents insisted, say, the girl must move beautifully. And Madison worked her ass off in ballet shoes all the time she was supposed to. George really understood her. His parents also knew what was best for him. Madison was always busy. She didn't just look like a businesswoman. She was one, participating in some contests and conferences, working part-time for the university. George didn't know how he had gotten so much information about this girl. She didn't notice him at all, didn't even know about the existence of such a modest, quiet guy. And George, no, he wasn't in love with her. He was attracted to a completely different type of girl, but for some reason he wouldn't let Madison out of his sight. George was in his 4th year of college. It was summer weather. The middle of May, the time of credits, the time to get admission to the session. The boy went out for a walk to the ice cream stand. Since morning he had been reading a thick notebook with notes, preparing for tomorrow's test. He decided to take a break. He was about to round the corner of the neighboring house when he heard behind him a loud growl from somewhere far away and a startled exhalation. That sound was what made George turn around. He hadn't expected to see this at all. Madison. Before, the guy had only seen her within the walls of the university. George knew that the girl lived somewhere in the center, renting an apartment, since she herself was not local. From somewhere, either from a village or from a regional town. And here she was, right next to George's house. It's strange, but there was no way to ponder it for long. 2 large dogs approached Madison. There had been a lot of stray dogs around here lately. There was a construction site nearby, so the animals lived somewhere behind the fence. The builders kind of fed them at first, but then construction stopped. Temporarily or permanently. George didn't know. And now hungry packs were roaming the neighborhood. There were attacks on people. Just now, 2 dogs were attacking Madison. The girl saw the look in the boy's eyes. And there was so much hope in her eyes that George, always a little cowardly and indecisive, just couldn't do otherwise. He grabbed a large boulder off the ground and headed straight for the dogs. He thought that if the dogs came at him, at least one of them would be able to hit him over the head with the rock. Maybe even stun the beast for a while. But then what would he do? There's still the other dog. There was no time to think about that. Just like that, George had become a hero. The boy approached Madison and asked, trying to keep his voice firm, not shaking. "Are you okay? They didn't do anything to you?" No, she shook her head, looking at her savior gratefully. "Thank you very much. I was confused." The girl was transforming from a confused and frightened, fragile victim into herself, into Queen Madison. Madison's gaze became firm, her movements and voice became confident. "Yeah, we've got some hungry dogs running around because of the frozen construction site, attacking a lot of people," the girl sighed. "I feel sorry for them, on the one hand. In the end, it's all our fault, humans. Listen, were you in a hurry?" "No," honestly, George replied. "Then can I ask you to walk me to 15 Lipovaya, please? I'm confused about the neighborhood. And I'm afraid of running into dogs again, to be honest. Can you walk me?" George felt like a real hero. Queen Madison herself was counting on him. "Oh my gosh. I will, of course." George deliberately took Madison the long way, even though he could have taken a shortcut through the courtyards. It was just nice to walk and talk to her like that. Madison turned out to be a wonderful conversationalist, intelligent, attentive, understanding. It turned out they liked the same books. Who knew? But no matter how George looped Lipovaya, 15 eventually grew in front of the 2 companions. "Well, here we are. Thank you again. I'm with the same group. We're studying together for a test." "All right," Madison said. "I'm at Orakov State University. Finance and economics?" I know George smiled, pleased with the effect. Madison was surprised. "How do you know?" "I go to law school there too. I've just seen you around, that's all. By the way, I have a midterm tomorrow, too. Wow, what a small world. It's not a small world, it's our Orakovskaya. Madison smiled charmingly and disappeared down the driveway. That day, George couldn't think of anything but Madison's deep, dark eyes. At least he was almost ready for his midterm. He'd never had any romantic feelings for this girl before, even though he'd known her, seen her, kept her in his sights. And now that they'd talked, Madison was like a spell on him. It was her pleasant, literate speech, her respectful attitude, her unexpected weakness, her fear of stray dogs. Madison was now drawing George to her like a magnet. The guy hoped they would see each other at the university the very next day. And so they did. Not entirely by accident, though. George specifically went to the floor where the economists were taking their exams. As if by accident, he walked past the classroom where the students were crowded. And he saw Madison. She also noticed him, nodded to the guy, and even hurried to meet him. At first, George and Madison were just friends, talking and walking together a lot. They even went to the movies for movies they both looked forward to. Luckily, they had specific tastes, so they went to such sessions, just the two of them, without extra eyes and ears. George admired Madison, savored her closeness. He wanted very much to take her hand, maybe even kiss it. But she was acting like a friend, like a buddy, and the guy was afraid of ruining everything. That's why he didn't show his feelings. It was better to remain friends than to feel awkward every time they met. He didn't want to destroy the warm buddy relationship that had already emerged. And then they found themselves at a common student party, a disco in honor of the end of the next academic year. Ahead was the 5th year, graduation. Almost the whole road to higher education is behind them. There was much to celebrate. George watched Madison dancing with the other guys and was wildly jealous. No, the girl didn't owe him anything. They weren't even considered a couple. George himself was free to dance with whomever he wanted, but these guys were hugging Madison in the dance. They made him resentful and furious. They called George names, but he didn't show it. He joked and laughed with his friends. He even entered some silly contests. And then, late in the evening when everything was over, Madison herself approached George. The guy noticed that the girl wasn't exactly sober. Officially, strong drinks were forbidden at this party, but of course they were actually present. "Don't you like me at all?" Madison asked with stunning directness. "Of course you do," George said, confused. He hadn't expected to hear that. "I mean, as a girl," Madison explained. "I'm not pretty, but I'm not ugly. Thin lips, tall, too thin. No shape. Do you like other girls?" And Madison was almost right. Until a few months ago, George did like other girls, so-called model girls. But now there was no one prettier or more attractive to him than Madison. I guess now was as good a time as any to tell him that. But for some reason, he couldn't find the right words. Madison, on the other hand, was very talkative. "Haven't you noticed how I feel about you? But we talk so much. And all the time I've been waiting for some sign from you that would make me think you like me too. But all you see in me is a friend, and now I've ruined everything." George shook his head negatively, glaring at the girl. "So be it. At least I'll finally tell you what I think. I'm in love, George, with you. Can you believe it? I always thought I liked guys who were more masculine, brutal, like athletes. I tried to hang out with this basketball player, and he turned out to be a fool. And all the other guys I hung out with were just as stupid. And you're not. You're different. Smart, understanding, real." George smiled. It was nice to hear Madison say that. He didn't know what to say in response, so he just put his arms around her, pulling her against him. The girl rested her head on his shoulder and continued her monologue. "I danced with all those people tonight too, didn't I? Only because of you. Only to make you jealous. But you remained indifferent. It hurt so much. "You don't understand," George sighed. "You're just like me." "What do you mean?" Madison pulled away and looked into George's eyes with interest. And then he did what he'd dreamed of doing for so long. George kissed the girl. They started dating. Quiet, modest law student and bright, successful beauty Madison, so different in temperament and character, but at the same time very similar in many ways. They had so many common, interesting topics of conversation, so many joint activities that both of them enjoyed. George and Madison really were like two halves of the same whole. It was Madison who helped George decide what he really wanted to do with his life. "You're a born psychologist," she once said. "You have a keen sense of people, interested in the feelings and thoughts of others. Try it, take a course. Maybe you'll get somewhere." And George listened. After graduation, he got a job at a law firm, did boring, routine work, got a pittance, and at the same time studied to be an online psychologist. That's what he really enjoyed. This was what he was really passionate about. "I told you," Madison smiled smugly. "I'm almost never wrong." Madison herself, meanwhile, was actively building her own business. She already owned an attire. This choice was not accidental. At school, Madison always studied on excellent, and only her hands were growing out of the wrong place, as the girl herself expressed it. The only problem she had was with labor lessons, where it was necessary to sew and the girl could not do it. Madison tried very hard, but all the same, the products of her classmates came out much more beautiful and neat. "Oh, I'm so bad with my hands." The technology teacher sighed over her students' creations. "No, it's not your thing. And how will you live, such an inept?" "I'm going to open my own attire," Madison promised her teacher. "Of course you'll marry a prince and become a millionaire. Is that what you all think when you're young?" The teacher didn't believe the girl, but she did grow up and opened an outlier. George supported Madison, and she supported him. Madison developed the attire, and George tried himself as a psychologist, began to counsel people. They lived together in a rented apartment. They didn't talk about marriage, but it was implied in the future, as if by itself. And then, Madison's business trip abroad came out of the blue. She had an opportunity to study at a prestigious business school. But it meant a long separation. "It's such a chance. You have no idea," Madison said, her eyes burning with excitement. George, of course, was happy for his beloved, but he was also worried. After all, it was not a matter of 1 month or even 6 months. Madison was to spend about 2 years abroad. How would that affect their relationship? For some reason, George had thought she'd find someone there and wouldn't want to go back at all. But he was wrong. The relationship really didn't stand the test of distance. But the blame for this was not on Madison. For the first time after his beloved left, George wasn't himself. He missed her so much. He'd missed her desperately from the moment he'd left Madison at the airport. He'd been doing everything on autopilot, working in his law office, counseling clients as a psychologist. Did they socialize? Sure, almost every night. Madison looked tired but happy and enthusiastic. "I like everything teachers, practical classes, even hours-long lectures." The girl shared her impressions with George. As usual, he spoke encouraging words and supported her. As time went on, the video sessions became increasingly rare. There was no time for Madison. The course was intense. Sometimes she just didn't have the time or energy to talk to George. He, of course, was getting himself worked up. It seemed to him that Madison had someone else. Their conversations were too superficial, infrequent, and short. Being a psychologist, George realized that it was his complexes. His distrust of Madison and fear of losing her all stemmed from insecurity. It seemed to George that there are plenty of young men around who are both prettier and more successful than he is. Of course, Madison compares and may be thinking about starting a relationship with someone else, someone more deserving. When Madison was around, he saw her eyes full of tenderness and acceptance, felt her warmth and sympathy. But now she was far away, and George began to think that Madison didn't love him at all, that she was worthy of more, that he wasn't up to her level. Madison is a successful beauty who has already started her own business. While she is studying abroad, the business is run by the manager, a former classmate of the girl, the same friend on the way to which Madison was attacked by dogs. And him. He's just a lowly lawyer with a salary of 30,000 rubles and an aspiring psychologist. It remains to be seen if he'll succeed in either of those fields. At this very moment in the life of George appeared Charlotte, a girl who recently broke up with a young man and now felt broken and depressed. That's why she turned to a psychologist. George consulted online. His clients were from different cities, but it so happened that Charlotte was his neighbor. She lived literally 2 blocks away. George realized this when he saw the view outside the window behind the beautiful girl on the screen. Huge, disturbing eyes of an amazing violet hue, long brown hair, cute. He didn't want to live a lie, so he told Madison everything honestly. It seemed to George that pain flashed in her eyes. Madison's lips trembled. Red blotches appeared on her cheeks, but she quickly pulled herself together, as she always did. "Well," Madison said, shaking her head, "this is unexpected news. Well, if that's your decision, I won't make a scene. We're both grown up and independent. Good luck with your new relationship." And Madison was off. And just like that, it was easy. No hard feelings, no accusations, no trying to find out the details. George sighed. It only confirmed his opinion that Madison had cooled off on him. Suddenly, that thought hurt. Still, Madison was someone special to George. Even after the breakup, he continued to think about her, even though he was fine with Charlotte. Charlotte seemed soft, malleable, pliable as warm wax. She had grown up in a small country town. Her family still lived there, so she had a somewhat patriarchal, traditional upbringing, and that was the beauty of it. Although as a psychologist, George realized that many of Charlotte's attitudes needed work. Charlotte was studying to be an economist. She'd lived in a dormitory before moving in with George. Her parents were not wealthy, so Charlotte could only rely on herself. She tried to study hard as she wanted to get an education, to get back on her feet. Studying before she met George was her first priority. But she fell in love, lost her head with a young psychologist, and therefore pushed everything to the second-plan: friends, lectures, exams, part-time work. Everything. George was flattered by this, of course. In turn, he tried to do something for Charlotte, worked more to buy her gifts, take the girl to restaurants and cafes, took on some of the household chores, which pleasantly surprised not accustomed to such behavior of men young lady. George bathed in love and admiration, enjoyed care and warmth. He had never felt so loved. Charlotte practically put him on a pedestal. Sometimes George was troubled by jealous thoughts. I wonder if she behaved the same way with her ex. Somehow it seemed she had. Caring and helpfulness were inherent in this girl's personality. Still, George thought about Madison. Such an interesting communication on equal terms he and Charlotte did not get. The girl often did not understand his jokes and almost never knew those authors or those movies that George told her about. And the man at such moments caught himself thinking that he still lacked Madison her wit, insight, directness. And then one day Charlotte told George that she was expecting a child, a very unexpected and untimely piece of news. Charlotte is still a student. George doesn't earn enough to support his family. He's just developing. He plans to study, gain new experience and knowledge. But if there is a baby, the development can be put on the cross. After all, training does not imply large earnings, and the family needs to be fed. George very cautiously suggested to Charlotte to make an abortion. It seemed to him that this was the best solution to all problems. The girl first took offense at him. First she yelled at George, which she had never done before. Then she cried. It was hard for George to look at her like that. He felt sorry for young Charlotte, who of course was also shocked by the news of her pregnancy. But George said, "Hey, don't cry. Do you hear me? Everything's going to be all right. We're going to be fine. You're not going to leave me, and you're not going to leave us now." "No, of course not." George pulled her even tighter against him. It's a good thing she couldn't see the look on his face. Confused, upset. He didn't want this baby. He didn't want it at all. No, George saw himself as a father in the future, maybe even a father of many children. But now, it was too soon to start a family. George was living in a rented apartment, working at an unloved and low-paid job, and he was just starting out as a psychologist. And Charlotte, she was beautiful, tender, caring. But George did not think of tying his life with her. It was a pleasant, unburdensome relationship, necessary for both of them the moment they met. George felt as if he had fallen into the trap of decency. Raised from a young age by his mother and father, responsibility kept him from abandoning his own child. Charlotte recovered a little and even began to enjoy the pregnancy. George gained additional clients. Now he was working from dawn to dusk. He had to get the cushion ready for the baby's birth. Charlotte and George applied to the registry office. They decided to do without a lavish celebration, although the bride still dreamed of a beautiful white dress and a wedding with guests and contests. She shared this with George with a slight sadness in her voice. But the girl understood perfectly well they would need the money for the baby. There was no need for unnecessary spending in their situation. George felt inadequate again. He couldn't even fulfill his future wife's wish. Charlotte's a young girl. Of course she wants to feel like a princess at her own wedding. She's involved with a poor rabble-rouser. So she has to shrink and endure hardship from the start. Charlotte was very afraid to break the news of her pregnancy to her parents. "You see, my parents were so happy that I got in. I am the first in the family with a higher education. I have so many hopes for me, and now I'll have to drop out." "Why? Can I take a sabbatical during childbirth and then you study?" "No, I have a family now. I know what it's like, all the time it takes. I don't want to be a wife or a mom. School's going to have to wait, and that's why I'm afraid to tell my parents. But I have to tell them, and it's best not to delay." Charlotte decided to go home on New Year's Eve. George offered to accompany her to support her in her predicament, and the bride's parents should probably get to know her. The man was sure he would find the right words to calm Charlotte's overbearing father and her mother. He works as a psychologist for a reason. But the girl had other plans. "No, I'd rather go to them myself the first time." "No, you don't know my dad? He's a man who's in a hurry. He can say some nasty things to you. He can get a little handsy." George was relieved that it was up to him to offer. Charlotte said no. Well, she knows what's right. Let her really talk to her own people, prepare the ground. Charlotte left and disappeared. She didn't answer her phone. Must have been a bad connection in her small hometown. All she'd managed to do was call from the train station to say she'd arrived. And that was it. George wasn't worried. Why would Charlotte suddenly come home to her family after all? Maybe her parents wouldn't be thrilled that their student daughter would soon make them happy with grandchildren. But they won't beat her up. Grumble, and accept the situation. Especially since the father of the child does not refuse Charlotte and the baby. They're getting married soon. George was enjoying being alone. Turns out he was a little tired of Charlotte. At one point in his life, she was his salvation. Pulled him out of his troubled thoughts, surrounded him with warmth, inspired him. But now her care and helpfulness irritated him. As did the intrusive attention, the almost nocturnal gaze, and a lot of other things. When Charlotte did not arrive on the agreed day, George did worry. The girl was starting lectures, preparing for the session. She could not miss all this without a good reason. The girl's phone was still stubbornly silent. So George went to the university where Charlotte was studying, tracked down her group, talked to a few people. They didn't know what had happened. When George had given up hope, a girl caught up with him in the hallway. Funny-looking redhead, pigtails sticking out in all directions. Looking for July. You must be George, he nodded slowly. Helen, her friend. We're from the same town. She asked me to look you up. And here you are. That's lucky. What about Charlotte? Why hasn't she come back, do you know? Oh, it's a story, it's a nightmare. Charlotte's parents are, very strict. She's their pride. The smartest, most promising kid in the family. They were so excited about their daughter getting in. They bragged to everyone in town, thought she'd become a successful economist. And then you came along and ruined all their plans. Charlotte's father was furious when he heard about his daughter's plans. Pregnancy out of wedlock, more like a wedding. Charlotte was going to drop out of school. She was going to be a good wife, an ideal mother, a housewife, instead of conquering career heights. In general, the strict parent decided no wedding and similar tricks early, and personally escorted his daughter to the clinic, where the head doctor was his former classmate. Even before New Year's Eve, the girl had an operation solved, according to her parents, all the problems, so that the child was no longer. George collapsed upon hearing this. He had seen the joy with which Charlotte had waited for the baby, and he could imagine the state she was in now. What's so wild about it anyway? Charlotte's an adult. She can make her own decisions. What about him? He wasn't even asked for his opinion. That's the way it is with us, Helen shrugged. We're used to listening to our parents. There's no other way around it. And Charlotte didn't go against her mother's and father's wishes either. Through Helen, Charlotte asked him to tell George that it was over between them. She told him not to look for her or try to find out anything on his own. Charlotte would now be studying part-time from home under parental supervision so that nothing like this would ever happen again. That's all she asked me to tell you, Helen faltered, clearly uncomfortable with being the messenger of bad news. She also said that your relationship was a mistake, but she also wished you happiness in your personal life. Thanks to her, too. George shook his head and walked toward the university exit. Later at home, he thought about the whole situation and came to the conclusion that everything had happened for the best. George didn't feel bitter about the loss. He didn't even feel upset. On the contrary, there was a kind of joy because everything resolved itself without his participation. There would be no child with the family. And it wasn't his fault. Charlotte, of course, is very sorry. Such overbearing parents are not to be envied. On the other hand, it's her choice. She could go against her father if she wanted to. Charlotte knew that George would accept her, would not let her down. And yet she gave up a child and the man she loved. That's good. Life went on as usual. Suddenly her work as a psychologist began to bear fruit, and very generous. Soon George left the hated work in the office and gave himself completely to the soul of healing. In relationships, he was now more cautious. Romances happened, but the man did not allow any mental intimacy, and even more so the appearance of his partner's thoughts of children, family, and so on. He did not want it all yet. Or maybe the women were not the right ones. The man involuntarily compared them all to Madison, and each time the comparison was not in favor of another companion. They didn't measure up to Queen Madison, not at all. George seemed to feel quite happy and accomplished. His favorite high-paying job, his own apartment, a beautiful car. And yet something was missing. And then fate brought him back together with the one he had been thinking about all this time. By that time, George was already quite a successful and established man. He was counseling people online from all over the United States. There was even a waiting list for his sessions now. George's services were already expensive. The man periodically published books that sold out like hotcakes. Editions he illustrated by himself, so realized another of his talents artistic. Since childhood, George constantly drew something in albums: fantastic creatures, courageous superheroes, animals different. In general, it turned out well. Parents admired, of course, but strongly advised his son to do something more serious, something that will help him in the future, will not starve to death. And it turned out like this. Now George was even asked to illustrate other people's publications. The psychologist's profession was supplemented by a part-time job as a digital artist. He had to take a couple of courses to sharpen his skills, and now George was in high demand as an illustrator. He lived in his beautiful and stylish apartment, drove an expensive car, had savings. In general, he was rightly considered quite well-to-do by his 30-plus years of age. Many at his age have never dreamed of such a thing. George, going to the bar that night, had not expected this meeting. He'd thought Madison had been living somewhere in Los Angeles for a long time. She'd disappeared from social media, so George couldn't keep up with her like he used to. But he thought that with her ambitions, Charlotte has nothing to do in this city. It was too small a town for Queen Madison. But it was she who sat at the bar with her foot on the leg. She was grown up, even well-groomed, stylishly and expensively, but not pretentiously dressed. Impeccable taste, solemn-looking, the same bottomless, penetrating eyes, seeming quite black in the semi-darkness of the bar, and the shiny black hair flowing down her back. Madison usually wore her hair shorter. This was the first time George had seen her like this, and it was a look that suited Madison very well. Madison was here with her friends. They were sitting at the counter since there were no more tables available. They were having a lively discussion, laughing. George felt numb. At first, he even wanted to leave the bar quietly, to run away, because, well, if they met, there would be something to talk about. And George still felt guilty that he had been the cause of their breakup. His infidelity was to blame, to be honest. And the resentment was there, too. Madison hadn't even tried to find out then, which meant she was already completely indifferent to him. Maybe she'd even met someone there, in a faraway land. But soon George realized that he wasn't afraid of meeting Madison. On the contrary, he was attracted to her, drawn to her like a magnet, just as he had been in his youth. The man couldn't take his eyes off her. Every move she made, every feature of her appearance, everything evoked complete acceptance. Everything was almost native, his own. She seemed to feel his gaze, turned around. Their eyes met, and Madison smiled at him without a shadow of resentment, without a shadow of contempt. George got up from his seat and moved toward her. They talked all night until morning, retiring to the far end of the bar, where the music was quieter, to enjoy their conversation. And talked. Madison talked about how, living abroad, it was not easy for her, studying from morning till night, unsettled life. What admirers. She did not even think about novels. Simply no strength or time for it, was not purely physically. So George's speculation about other men was false. What did you say the other day about us breaking up? That you were seeing someone else? They knocked me off my game for a long time, Madison said. I even thought about dropping out of school, but then, of course, I pulled myself together. George looked into Madison's eyes and understood. He could feel how hard and sad it had been for her. The guilt was overwhelming him more and more. Well, I got what I deserved for what I did, George sighed. It's not for nothing they say about the boomerang of fate. And the man told about his situation with Charlotte. He didn't forget to mention that he'd been thinking about Madison all these years, and regret, desperately sorry for the breakup he'd initiated. I felt like I wasn't good enough for you, Madison admitted. I thought you needed someone stronger and more successful. And now? What do you think now? Are you worthy of me now? The question made George hot. He knew Madison was asking for a reason. Was there really a 1 in a million chance that something between them was still possible? I'm perfectly capable of handling a gorgeous woman like you right now, George said jokingly, but his eyes were serious. Madison smiled and kissed him herself. That's how they ended up together again. Madison and George had both already reached certain career heights. George was a sought-after psychologist, and Madison ran a chain of attires. Incidentally, the same labor teacher who had once looked down on her was now working for Madison. The owner of the network did not tell the new employee why she chose this particular area of business. But this turn of fate pleased her. The gestalt had finally come to a complete close. George and Madison decided to buy a house. They chose a cottage in a well-appointed village not far from the city. It seemed to both of them that such a place would be better for raising children. Children both George and Madison already felt quite ready for parenthood. The age is quite solid, the material base is created. What's the point of procrastination? To plan heirs began even at the stage of preparation for the wedding. Both went through doctors. George turned out to be perfectly healthy. Madison, on the other hand, had some problems. "I wish you'd been a mother sooner," the doctor shook his head. 5 or 6 years ago, everything would have been much easier. But your problems have progressed over the... There are techniques, Madison said firmly. There are other ways to become parents. Lately, it's been worth monitoring orphanage websites. You don't realize how many orphans there are now. Some still in the maternity hospital, some later being abandoned. There's one boy. No, George responded immediately. There are definitely no foster children. The man understood perfectly well what Madison was getting at: a foster child, the offspring of someone unknown. George had a prejudice against adoption. Neighbors Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason are good people, kind and smiling. They were always attentive to the local kids and candy treat them, and let them play with their dog, and even sincerely interested in the affairs of the neighborhood children. It was especially pleasant, by the way, but they had no children of their own. George's mother and other neighbors often sighed about it. What good parents Mason and Carolyn would have made, but God didn't give it to them. Too bad. May. And then they did have a baby, a chubby little boy named Stephen, about 4 years old. George was surprised. He already understood then that at first children are very small. They do not walk, do not speak. They are carried in a stroller. But this one was so big at once. Aunt Carolyn herself explained to the local kids that Stephen was a boy from the orphanage. How it happens that babies are left without parents, and some are lucky enough to be taken into a family. George was happy for Stephen even then. He was very lucky indeed. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason are the best parents you can dream of. The boys have taken over Stephen's care. The girls babysat him. The boys took him to their games. Of course, in all things giving in to the little guy. And at first, everyone seemed to like Stephen. And then the kid started to grow up and began to manifest in him qualities that at first simply caused rejection, and then grew into something terrible, ugly, unimaginable. Simply put, Stephen became a monster. In first grade, he started smoking. That's when he was first caught stealing. Stephen did not want to sit quietly in class, hit and insulted children, walked around the classroom instead of sitting at his desk. The teacher couldn't do anything with him. Stephen swore profanities, even though Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason were intelligent people. His foster mother and father were nothing to him. George still remembered how Stephen's parents ran around the yard at night looking for their wayward son. The neighborhood boys helped them. And then there's more. Stephen got mixed up with a bad crowd. He skipped school, smoked, even started drinking when he was only a 5th grader. Theft, vagrancy. The adults often discussed the situation, and all agreed that genes were to blame. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason were portrayed in neighborhood conversations as innocent martyrs who had shouldered the burden for nothing. They were really good parents, loved Stephen, did a lot with him. But the power of genes. Even then, George realized that blood is not water, and that even the most correct upbringing cannot always correct the code that was written by nature for generations. Stephen soon found himself in a prison for juvenile delinquents, maimed someone in a street fight. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason tried to get him out, even sold the apartment. In exchange for a spacious 3-bedroom, they bought a tiny and old house somewhere on the outskirts of town and moved in. So George didn't know what happened to their family next, but assumed that nothing good could be there anymore, unless Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason finally got rid of Stephen. And now, when Madison started talking about foster children, George, of course, remembered his neighbor. No, he was not going to go along with that. Madison did not fully accept his choice. His wife periodically tried to change George's mind, gave seemingly reasonable arguments, talked about positive examples. Only George was adamant. He didn't want him and Madison to turn from happy, beautiful, and healthy people into something like Uncle Mason and Aunt Carolyn, so thin, pale, and reserved. No way. Over time, Madison seemed to settle down. She found her purpose in something else. The woman now traveled to orphanages and helped poor, destitute children. It was charity. At one orphanage, she set up a playroom, and at another, a backyard playground with swings and slides. Madison would find out what the problems were in one or the other institution and solve them. Somewhere there weren't enough babysitters, somewhere the roof was leaking, somewhere the students were wearing old, outdated clothes. Madison not only closed the priority needs of orphanages, but also did something more organized directly in the orphanage's circles and sections, so that the orphans could find themselves to show their talents, arranged for children's fancy holidays. Madison got like-minded people. The woman felt almost happy. Although she had no children of her own, but she gave joy and warmth to 1,000 strangers' disadvantaged children. Madison's activities were even written about in newspapers, filmed commercials. George was happy for his wife. Finally, she found herself, realized her maternal instinct in such an interesting way. It was good for everyone. The man himself sometimes took part in the actions, and now he called his wife nothing but the good fairy. Madison laughed and said that she liked the former title queen better. Something of the former cold and unyielding Queen Madison in her still remained. And yet the wife has changed a lot. Became much softer, more tolerant, calmer. She often talked to George about the babies. You could see that her heart ached for each of them. But thankfully, Madison never spoke of adoption again. George thought his life was now set for many years to come. Except that fate threw him a test again, which he failed miserably. Vanessa was one of his assistants who served as his secretary. A young, dazzlingly beautiful woman who looked like a photo model from a glossy magazine. George himself didn't realize how it happened. He and his team were celebrating another successful project of some kind at the restaurant. Madison wasn't there, she had just left for another city on business. Vanessa asked the chief to dance. George saw her huge mermaid eyes for the first time. So close they looked like 2 green pools. Just stunning eyes of some kind. George couldn't resist. How was it even possible to be sympathized with such a beautiful girl? They went to Vanessa's rented apartment and spent the night. In the morning, George had no regrets, strangely enough. On the contrary, he felt happy around a beautiful woman. Anyway, they became lovers. Vanessa was just perfect, beautiful, unassuming, passionate. She understood that their relationship was a secret, and did not seem to claim anything at first, and then began to talk about love, the development of their romance, and even about divorce. George didn't understand himself. He was physically attracted to Vanessa. He was dizzy with her green eyes, her slightly husky voice, her scent, her light blonde hair. But Madison, she was his soulmate. George, being a psychologist, couldn't make sense of himself. Could this really be possible? He fell in love with 2 women at once. All in all, it was a difficult time for George. Now he felt guilty in front of both of them, both his legal wife and Vanessa. The decision had to be made. But how could he do it so that he wouldn't regret it? And then Vanessa pulled a trump card out of her sleeve. Think about it. But I'll give you our own child. Madison won't be able to do that anymore. But me, George hesitated. Indeed, with Vanessa, they might have a strong, full-fledged family. But it was hard to leave Madison, too. She was already family, her own, loyal, dependable. Betray her again. And yet the decision was ripe. George chose Vanessa. He planned to remain friends with Madison, but the man was still hesitant to voice his decision to his wife. Vanessa was rushing him. She was understandable. She wanted certainty. George, however, continued to hesitate. And once again, fate intervened. Something happened that George never expected. One day, Madison said they needed to have a serious talk. The conversation took place that evening in the living room of a house too spacious for a family of two. George was nervous. He felt like Madison had found out everything about him and Vanessa, and was about to start asking him uncomfortable questions head-on. On the one hand, that would be better, at least it would finally be resolved. On the other hand, she wanted to present the situation to Madison in a different way. "I have some bad news for you," Madison began. George tensed. Here it comes. Only further his wife told such a story that worries about the disclosure of the affair with Vanessa seemed to be nothing. "I'm sick, and I'm very sick. I've been diagnosed with an incurable blood disease. I just found out about it recently. It took a long time to get a diagnosis. Why? Why didn't I tell you before?" Madison grinned. "I just didn't want to worry you too much. I thought it was just a vitamin deficiency or something. And then I got this scary diagnosis. Is there really no cure?" George didn't want to believe what his wife was saying. It seemed that anything could be cured nowadays, if only there was money. And fortunately, they had the money. Madison shook her head sadly. She put her hands on George's shoulders. A soothing, warm gesture. She was also comforting him while in this state. "Amazing. I don't believe you can't be helped. We'll fight." George was about to leave his wife, but he didn't want to lose her. Like this, permanently, completely, and irrevocably. Madison meant a lot to him. She was his own person, his own loved one. He wouldn't give her up to some disease for anything. "Remember years ago when you said we should accept the fact that we weren't going to have kids? Accept the situation. That's what I'm doing now. We just have to accept it," Madison said. George shook his head negatively. "It wasn't the same," he countered. Again, the tests at the clinic, the consultations with medical luminaries from all over the world. Only now the battle was not for the dream of parenthood, but for Madison's life. George wasn't about to give up. He studied a lot of information about his wife's disease. Now he better understood the situation. Yes, the disease was indeed very insidious and dangerous. Most patients, once diagnosed, died within a year. But there were also exceptions, cases of miraculous healing, and George hoped for that. Of course, he hadn't told Vanessa about Madison's illness. He didn't want to break bad news to someone in that condition. Vanessa agreed with George's decision. She said she was willing to wait until Madison's situation was resolved one way or another. Vanessa was even supportive of George, seeing how hard it was for him. She knew Madison meant a lot to him, but she wasn't jealous the perfect life partner. Madison was getting worse and worse, despite her extensive treatment, and she was slowly fading away. George cared for her on his own, spending her last days. It was hard, realizing that the fight was lost. The man still couldn't get over it. Madison, on the other hand, seemed to have accepted the situation and even calmed down. The woman quite consciously enjoyed every day, realizing that there was not much left. She met with friends, visited, as long as there was strength, beautiful and favorite places. George tried to accompany his wife everywhere, but he had a job and Vanessa needed some attention. Madison sometimes asked him to leave her alone. They talked a lot during this period. "I'm grateful to fate for the fact that in my life there is a man like you." The woman smiled at her husband. "You always understood me like no one else, felt my soul." "That's worth a lot," George said, squeezing his wife's hand and feeling guilty again. It was a good thing Madison didn't know about Vanessa after all. What luck that he didn't have time to reveal his cards in front of his wife. All he needed was a negative experience at such a difficult time. I think about that sometimes too. It's lucky we met, Madison replied sincerely. You're a unique person, the closest to me, she said paradoxically. These words were also true. George understood perfectly well that he was losing a dear person, a close friend, and there would never be a warmer and deeper relationship in his life. Madison left at dawn in her sleep. Quiet and peaceful, an easy end. As many people said later, a nurse slept in the room with her. Her frightened scream woke George, and he knew immediately. The ambulance, the police, filling out paperwork, preparing to say goodbye. It was all a blur. George still couldn't accept the fact that Madison was gone. She was gone. Not anywhere. Where could it all suddenly disappear to? Her sharp mind, her love of children, her determination, her courage. How is that possible? Peter was supported at this difficult moment by Vanessa. She honestly tried to reassure the man, but Vanessa had never felt him as subtly as Madison did. She said things that hurt the man even more. It's all for the best. At least she doesn't have any pain now. And the situation worked itself out. You didn't even have to say anything. George shook his head. How could losing someone like Madison be for the best? Vanessa just doesn't understand anything. There were even words like, think about it, you get all the kids now, you didn't have any, so you're the only heir. And in a divorce, everything would have to be divided in half. George looked at Vanessa in such a way that she immediately realized what a terrible foolishness she had said. The girl tried to remedy the situation. Well, I mean, she got sick anyway. It would have happened anyway. And this is such a benefit. Just shut up, George asked. People came to say goodbye, lots of people. Madison's co-workers and friends. And those she had helped over the years. They came up to George, offering condolences, saying nice things about Madison, and George was proud of her, proud of his wonderful wife. Desperately regretted that he too rarely told Madison how wonderful she was, and yet he was glad that sometimes he did say it. It had been several days since Madison had left, which George still couldn't believe. Then a woman called him, introduced herself as a notary, made an appointment. I invite you for the reading of the will. George was surprised. He didn't know Madison had made a will. Probably she had decided to make it easier for him to receive the inheritance, took care of everything before. Vanessa volunteered to go with George. It would probably be kind of inappropriate if it was okay with you. You're in that state right now. You need support. Vanessa cut Vanessa off. George nodded. She was probably right. He shouldn't even be driving right now. He couldn't even keep his head straight. It would be good to have someone more sensible around. And now George was sitting in the kitchen smoking out the window. It was early morning. Vanessa was still asleep. George was the one with insomnia, unfortunately, and he wanted to go to sleep and see Madison. Maybe even talk to her. George sighed, putting the kettle on, needing to drink strong, hot, black coffee. Maybe that would cheer her up a little. His head felt heavy. George poured the steaming coffee into a cup, sat down at the table again, and thought. He thought back to Madison. Their life, her dreams and plans and desires. Yeah, the world had lost a lot of things. Madison had done so much good for people, for underprivileged children. Vanessa was even seriously afraid to hear from the notary that Madison had bequeathed all her money to some orphanage or children's home. George was distracted from his musings by Vanessa. She flew into the kitchen, anxious, disheveled, but still unrealistically beautiful. We're late, announced the girl in a voice shaking with excitement. I overslept. I don't know why you're sitting there like a statue. George, as if out of a daze, came out. took a sip of coffee that had long since cooled, and began to pack. They were on time, though they got to the office when they were still 5 minutes away from the meeting with the notary. They were lucky no traffic, no accidents on the way. "Vanessa, are we expecting anyone else?" Vanessa asked, putting her foot on her leg. "No, everyone is here now." The notary acted professionally and did not react to the negativity of the cranky visitor. She stood up, offered condolences to those present, and said a few warm words about Madison. Then she took out of a large envelope a double-folded sheet of paper, both sides written in Madison's neat handwriting. "This letter is for you." The notary handed the sheets to George. "You can read it here. Anyway, this is where the deceased explains everything to you." George clutched the letter with both hands. He couldn't wait to be alone to read Madison's last message. There was no doubt in his mind that something very important was written there. The notary then began to read the will aloud, as was her custom. As George had expected, a considerable amount of money was bequeathed by Madison to a foundation that supported orphans. Vanessa cringed when she heard the size of the transfer. But George was getting all the real estate, cars, and even the business. The man, however, had no idea what he was going to do with a chain of attires. He never really got into his wife's business. But it seemed that this business was already quite a well-oiled mechanism. It worked like clockwork on its own. Madison managed to adjust the firm in such a way that everything functioned without her direct participation and control. And then the notary said something that made Vanessa jump on the spot like a scalded woman. Madison had left a large sum of money to a girl named Danielle, the same girl who was now sitting across from George with her elderly grandmother. Danielle hadn't even noticed the amount. She was too young to realize how much money it was. The old lady, however, realized it. She shuddered, turned pale, then even blanched. An obliging woman notary immediately offered the agitated visitor a glass of water. "Who the hell are these people?" Vanessa was indignant. "We don't know them. Are they her relatives?" "Well, they're obviously not first cousins. Otherwise, the deceased's husband would have known them." "What's going on?" "It's all done by law," confirmed the notary. "It's the will of the deceased. A person can name whoever they want in their will. It doesn't have to be relatives." "Who are you?" Vanessa addressed the old lady directly. "You're frauds? Don't get your hopes up. You'll get nothing. I can prove that Madison was incompetent when she signed the will. I mean, she's a sick person. And you probably took advantage of her condition?" Danielle looked at Vanessa, not with fear, no, more like disappointment. George noticed that at the very beginning of the meeting the girl had admired Vanessa. Of course, she's so beautiful, just a photo model. But now the idol was turning into a monster. Screaming, petty, greedy. "Calm down," George said irritably over his shoulder. He himself was not surprised at this outcome. The man realized that his wife was sure to give some of what she had accumulated in her life to charity. The girl and the grandmother are obviously very poor. Madison must have wanted to help them, but why them? And with such a large sum of money. "I'm sorry, I'm not protesting in any way," George said to the old woman. "If my wife has decided so, it's the right thing to do. But I was just wondering, how did you meet Madison? Why did she choose you?" The old woman looked George carefully in the eye. That look. There was judgment in it. And for some reason, pain. "You know," she said in a shaky voice, "read the letter and you'll understand. Danielle, we have to go." The girl slid off the chair with relief. What was happening clearly began to strain her anger and wanted to leave this place with an oppressive, heavy atmosphere. "Let's read the letter," Vanessa demanded as the door slammed shut behind her. "At least we'll know who they are." "Vanessa, you see, I have to read it alone," Vanessa said, her lips tightening resentfully. George was sitting in an old coffee shop he frequented as a student. He had chosen the farthest table against the wall behind the racks of houseplants. It was quiet, peaceful, cozy, and lonely. There was no better place to finally read a letter. Vanessa was not so easy to get rid of. She wanted to be with George when he began to study Madison's message. She even had to raise her voice at her. And now George was here alone with that very letter. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. I wondered what Madison was trying to tell him. "Well, hello, George. That's how the message began. If you're reading this letter, I'm sadly gone. That's a shame, of course. Life is a good thing. Anyway, it's already happened. Then it's time for you to know everything. I love you. You know you love me too. I'm sure you do. Despite your occasional flings. I know about Vanessa too, by the way. I wish I could have seen her face when she heard how much money I bequeathed to Danielle. It must have been fun." George shuddered. So Madison knew about Vanessa. What a nightmare. And he had been putting so much effort into not upsetting his wife. All the energy that should have been going into fighting the disease. Don't think I'm upset about Vanessa. No, I'm not. I get it. You're the kind of man who can't live his whole life with one woman. A creative person who needs inspiration, a muse. George thought about it. Wow. Madison understood him better than he did. Vanessa is just such a muse. But I never, ever doubted that you loved me, didn't I? You were there for me during a difficult time in my life. Supportive, caring, that's priceless. I wasn't so scared with you. You fought so fiercely for me when I knew I was done, when I had resigned myself to it. But you didn't give up until the end. You have no idea what it all meant to me. Thank you for that. And know that you're my nearest and dearest. George felt tears welling up in his eyes. The sharp pain of losing Madison pierced his heart again. Yes, he felt the same way. Madison. She had been someone near and dear to his heart. They were more than just husband and wife. Soulmates. Soulmates. George would go to great lengths for her, and she would do the same for him. Now let's talk about Danielle. She's a wonderful girl, isn't she? I'm sure you've seen her already. She's so sweet. Does she remind you of anyone? I mean, she's a lot like someone who's not a stranger to both of us. I met her a long time ago, 3 years ago. She was just a little girl, a first grader. You know, I help orphanages. Danielle's an orphan too, but at least she has a great-grandmother. But she and her grandmother live very poorly. And at that time, things got so bad that the old lady had to put her granddaughter in an orphanage. It was hard for both of them, but the orphanage fed and clothed her. But the great-grandmother couldn't always do that. I saw Danielle at the New Year's Eve performance. The children had prepared a big concert. The girl's great-grandmother was in the audience. She was crying into a soaked handkerchief. A sad sight. The girl attracted my attention first by her appearance. The little beauty reminded me of someone, only I did not immediately realize who. Have you finally figured it out? Or not yet? I asked the teachers about the fate of the little girl and was horrified. A 7-year-old girl had to go through things that not every adult can endure. Danielle had everything to be happy about at first. She lived in a small provincial town with her mom, grandparents. She didn't have a daddy, but it's not uncommon today, is it? A lot of kids grow up without fathers. It's not surprising. Danielle was everyone's favorite. The young mother was very fond of Danielle. It was said that she gave birth to a girl by a man she loved very much, and he abandoned them. He didn't want to be a father, he was scared. Good thing Danielle's mom had good parents. Of course, they did not abandon her daughter in a difficult situation, accepted, supported, and when she gave birth, they helped the young mother with her baby. They lived like that, and the 4 of them grandmother was engaged in the household. Grandfather earned money to feed the increased family, and her mother was studying at the university by correspondence, because now she had a baby in her arms. Danielle grew up a healthy and obedient child. That's what they call a gift child. Her mother adored her. Her grandmother and grandfather doted on her. There was no money in the family, but adults spoiled Danielle as much as possible. Danielle's mother had a dream to go to the sea with her daughter, show the little girl high waves, walk with her along the coast, breathe fresh sea air. When the girl was 4 years old, the grandfather decided to fulfill the wish of his daughter and granddaughter. He saved up some money and planned a trip to the sea in the family car. It was cheaper that way. At first, everything went just fine. The family spent a wonderful vacation on the seashore. All the dreams of Danielle's mother came true in walks on the beach, and a southern tan, and beautiful bright pictures. But on the way back home on the highway, there was a terrible accident. The car lost control and overturned several times, plunging into a ditch. Already later, the cause was established. It turned out that my grandfather had a heart attack right behind the wheel. A long trip, heat, plenty of impressions, a sudden change of climate. A lot of factors came together. This is the result. The driver himself was almost unhurt, but he was not taken to the hospital. The cause of death was a heart attack. His wife died on the spot from her injuries. The daughter, Danielle's mom, was taken to the hospital, but her condition was very serious. The young woman was placed in intensive care. So what happened to the youngest passenger? It's a miracle, but Danielle survived. She got off with a couple of abrasions and a fright, but not a light fright. The girl cried out at night for a long time, and often dreamed about this terrible accident. The little girl was taken to her only close relative, great-grandmother Danielle. She had lost her son-in-law and daughter in the accident. Her granddaughter lay in the hospital dying. But the old woman pulled herself together for the sake of great-granddaughter Danielle. After all, in this difficult period needed near a sensible adult person, able to take on all the cares of the girl. The mother of the little girl was in a serious condition, but there was still hope for her salvation. For treatment required money, and a lot of it. So the old lady had to sell the apartment where the once happy family lived. She reasoned as follows: now the main thing to pull Danielle's mom, and money, apartments, unlike human life, it is a matter of gain. When her granddaughter gets on her feet, then she'll earn money. Until then, they can live in a one-bedroom apartment they will somehow fit. This old lady was wrong about the three of them. The treatment didn't work. Danielle's mother wasn't saved. The girl was left an orphan. She had no one in the world but her old great-grandmother. No, there was a father somewhere, but how to find him? The old woman did not know the details of her granddaughter's history. She had no idea where Danielle's father might be. And did he need a daughter if he had already abandoned her? There was nothing to do, so the great-grandmother began to raise her little granddaughter alone. It was hard. At such a respectable age, to keep up with a small child, oh, how not easy. And as for the financial side of things, it was a disaster. Danielle's great-grandmother's pension was meager. Her health was also poor, and she couldn't get a part-time job. Then there was Danielle's allowance. It had to be registered and confirmed every year, and it cost the old woman a lot of labor. So much paperwork to collect, so many offices to run through. But the old woman tried, ran, collected so that her great-granddaughter Danielle had at least this minimum allowance. And as if somehow the old woman and the girl lived poorly, saving on everything, already exhausted but kept afloat. And then came the time when Danielle had to go to school. And that was it. The family budget couldn't keep up with the new spending. Great-grandmother got her granddaughter into school, even went into debt. And after that, times were very bad when even bread was not enough every day. That's why the great-grandmother, with a broken heart, made the decision to place Danielle in an orphanage, temporarily, due to her difficult financial situation. And then there was this concert. The stage I saw Danielle, I was hooked by her looks, and the story began. Danielle looks a lot like you. Did you notice same eyes, same look, same brow sweep? And the mole on her cheek, the same mole, exactly the same. I looked at the girl and realized there's no such thing as coincidence. And then it turned out it really wasn't a coincidence. George took his eyes off the letter. How had he not realized that? Danielle really did look a lot like him. It was not without reason that the girl seemed familiar to him. He saw almost the same features in the mirror every day. I started digging deeper. I even had to hire detectives. And I found out, well, don't fall out of your chair or whatever you're sitting on. Danielle is your daughter. I purposely withheld her mother's name before, or you would have figured it out. And I like to keep things intriguing. You know, it's more fun that way. Danielle's mom is Charlotte. Yeah. The same Charlotte you left behind when she was expecting the baby. George wanted to object. It was important to him to prove to Madison that he hadn't abandoned Charlotte. It was the circumstances. Her parents had decided everything for them, sent their daughter for an abortion so that she could study and build a career. And he himself, George, was ready to get married. They even had time to apply to the registry office. Did Madison left thinking that her spouse was such a mean man? That's what great-grandmother Danielle told me, that you left a pregnant Charlotte. Scared, didn't want to be a father, didn't want to take on the responsibility, George thought. Something didn't seem right to me right away. So of course I decided to do some more digging. I found out that you applied to the registry office, but the wedding didn't take place. Why? I tracked down Charlotte's best friend. She told me. The girl's father was against the wedding. He did send his daughter to hospital at first, but it turned out there was nothing she could do. All the deadlines had been missed. Charlotte seemed to love you very much. She begged her parents to let her be your wife, especially since you'd already applied. But my father was adamant. He felt that as a wife and mother, his daughter would never graduate from university. And decided so. Charlotte gives birth, lives with her parents, they help with the baby, and she finishes her studies, builds a career, and then does what she wants. Except that then never came. Charlotte, yes, she studied, of course. But the accident happened shortly after she got her degree. Who knows, maybe if she'd stayed alive, she would have found you sooner. She probably would have. Well, Danielle's great-grandmother didn't know who the girl's father was, so she couldn't find you if she wanted to. That's the story. If it wasn't for chance, Danielle would still be without a father. Now, I hope you understand why I left her this much money. She's your daughter. I had to help that little girl, but it wasn't just money. Hello, Virginia. I'm driving right now. Actually, it's dangerous for drivers who are on the highway and distracted by their phones. Maybe they're being indoctrinated by their moms, too. Why shouldn't I drive in the face of danger? I want to be on time. You raised me to be responsible, Jordan said. Mommy, I'm not laughing. I listened to you and I heard you. I'll call you Sunday night, okay? Say hello to your father. Bye, kisses. Ending the call, Jordan couldn't hold back a wide smile, satisfied, slightly patronizing. Mom, she doesn't change, she's methodical, and her Jordan's tenacity in pursuing her goal is exactly what he inherited from her. His deputy, Max, he's been told, refers to him in private as my fanatical boss, and he says it with pride. Employee partners considered Jordan serious, down-to-earth, dry atom in solving problems, even rigid. No one doubted that was logical. And what else could a village boy from the Archangelsk backwoods, born in the family of a forestry farm driver and a village accountant, be like? And by the age of 35, he had managed to turn into the owner of a large and quite successful wholesale company in St. Petersburg? Jordan traded fish and seafood, supplied stores, restaurants, and small wholesale warehouses in his native village. That's what they called him, Jordan the wholesaler. Jordan had to visit his hometown often. And no amount of busyness would have been an excuse to himself if he hadn't visited his own for a couple of months. It wasn't that he missed the country life, it didn't appeal to him at all. It would be somewhere in the south, on the Mediterranean, or the Adriatic, where the colors are bright, people smiling from the eternal sun. That's where he would live in a village in the summer. And the forestry farm. No, that's enough. Having more or less confidently established himself in St. Petersburg, starting to get on his feet, he immediately began to persuade his parents to move in with him. "I'll buy you an apartment not far from me, so that in case of anything to help promptly," he said. "I know that you helped us," his father grinned, not without pride. "But I've lived here all my life. Jordan neighbors, friends, fishing, hunting, mushrooming, all here. I'll find something to do here every day when I retire," Harold said. "Think about it. Can you imagine me in the city? I'm not used to theaters and museums. I'm not interested. There are no friends there. No one to go fishing or to the bathhouse with. I've never lived in an apartment there, and I don't want to start. I need my own house, my own yard to get out. And here's this walled forest, a bathhouse by the woods, which I cut down myself. Am I just going to leave it all like this? I'm running away. You have to live in a house, or it will quickly deteriorate if it stands like a summer house. You've started to earn money. Soon you'll want to have a family. There will be a place to bring the kids on vacation." Harold smiled. "Nicholas, you're funny, you're affectionate." "Not offended at all," said his mother, not interrupting his father and cleverly developing a pause in his words. "Well, who now takes children on vacation in the village? And what modern girl would come here on vacation to feed mosquitoes? Jordan would take them to the south, to the sea, to the exotic, wouldn't he, Jordan?" "Maybe," Jordan said, taking his mother's words as an agreement to move to Peter. "Do you understand me? I'll organize a trip to the south for you too. Take a vacation this summer. Don't waste money, you'll only need it yourself." "We are quite happy with life in the north," Harold objected. "When I get rich, then yes, I'll be happy to go," winked his mother. "But I don't want to move either. Although I miss you very much, but I do not want to. I have a comfort zone here." "Mom, I see that you are aware of the trends of modern psychology?" Jordan laughed. "I've never been retarded," Mom laughed back at him. "We're very young, my father and I. We don't need much help. We manage on our own. When you have children and you need my help with your grandchildren, then maybe we'll move." "If I'm your wife," Kimberly smiled. Jordan knew his mom too well to insist on anything right now. If she said no, she could change her mind, of course, but only after much thought on her own. And at someone else's request or demand, never. His mother, a small round blonde with a snowy, pretty face everyone imagined at first glance soft and malleable. But those who knew her better would have laughed at such an opinion. Sweet, cozy, she really never raised her voice, did not achieve their hysterics and scandals, and in the most difficult situations always kept calm, which the head of the village administration called Olympic. She had a strong and stubborn character. She masterfully managed to stealthily direct the impulsive father where she intended, and do not limit his freedom in all sorts of male trifles. She was gentle and clever at the same time. I guess they're not born like that anymore, they're just disappearing off the face of the earth. Jordan inherited his mother's quiet stubbornness for a reason. He never gave up hope of convincing his parents. When assertiveness, practicality, and what to hide, a share of luck allowed him to start his own business, and not so slowly increase turnover, he bought a small house near Zelenogorsk, requiring cosmetic repairs, and brought his parents there for a visit. Look, what a place. A gorgeous forest, a bay. The Rybatskaya campground is nearby, excellent. The owner, Harold, the same age as my father, a great guy. Repair can be done under himself in any style. We'll order together. We'll think it over only for yourself and order as you like or as it is fashionable now. It's your house. What are we going to do here? You'll soon bring a young mistress into it. There can't be two mistresses in a house, and when they get along so that both of them are comfortable, it's a very rare case, an exception to the rule. Nicholas and I are very proud of you, and we will come to visit you with pleasure. But we have our own house, Kimberly said, as steadfast as a small rock. Sometimes Jordan grew tired of chasing. He called it that out of habit, not just driving, but any business endeavor. Jordan allowed himself to stop for a few minutes of relaxation at the first place he could find. Sometimes he didn't realize why he was attracted to it. What did it matter? All that mattered was the result. Now he skipped Sukodolskoye Lake and regretted it. But don't come back. But why not? I stopped on the outskirts of some small village at the first gas station. At least I could eat some stupid hot dog and think over the options of a pleasant night's stay. A closer look through the Cozy Apartments app on the way would not hurt now. I got out of the car, breathed in the air. The mixture of gasoline and white grass behind the gas station was a safe distance away. A campfire was burning, a few young, long-legged guys jumping around. Fall, warming up. Let go of the dog, asshole. A gusty voice interrupted Jordan's relaxation. He switched instantly when he sensed danger or any inconvenience to himself. He was too tired now. An indifferent apathy came over him, but he had to return from his cocoon to the sinful earth, albeit reluctantly. "What are you doing here again?" came the lazy response. The cheerleading squeal picked up the same lazy yell. Jordan was involuntarily wary. He didn't like such cheerleaders from his forestry childhood. "Give the dog back," I said. "We'll barbecue your hat, we'll roast it, and we'll roast you too. Only with a different recipe," if you perform, came a threatening voice. Laughter and squeals confirmed the seriousness of intentions. "Not impressed?" cut off the frightened voice. In the circle of light stood a skinny, long-haired, red-headed girl in a short jacket, tight jeans, and rubber boots. Almost a child, but already shapely. Around her, several tall and fit guys backed away from the bright light. She didn't. Just quickly caught and hugged by the neck a shaggy, dirty dog that one of the guys had let loose. "Kimberly, covered in fine. Come back. Let's go home," the well-packed man said mockingly, as if he'd accidentally forgotten to pack his hunting carbine in the trunk and was tossing it from hand to hand in a measured motion. Jordan glanced at the red-headed girl. "Wow, you weren't in much of a hurry," she stated with leftist savvy. The redhead shook her hair and, to the silent disapproval of those around her, turned and walked toward the stout man. Not too hurriedly, but with a dead grip on the withers of the confused dog. "Thank you," the girl said as soon as she stepped into the gas station. "Where can I take you?" Jordan asked almost idly, like a rescue answering machine. The girl was in no danger of being victimized by bullies at this point, and some reasonable detour could be made to take her home, but there was no interest in socializing with her at all. "Strangers and strangers are addressed as you," she reminded him without pretense. Jordan shuddered in surprise and cheered up a little. For the first time that evening and all day, he shook off the weight of strategic thoughts. From the girl came a tangible aroma of stale clothes, 3 kilograms of clay on each boot. What an impoverished noblewoman. "Where shall I take you?" he asked. "Kayla." "I'm afraid I'm not expected anywhere," the redhead shrugged her sharp shoulders. "Look, just because you had a fight with Mom and Dad doesn't mean you have to make them put out a bolo. I'm sorry, I'm back on the you again. How old are you?" "Don't. Just this one. That a lady doesn't ask her age." Jordan was surprised, although I wouldn't be surprised by such an answer. "No, I'm fine with that," he said calmly. "A girl. I'm 21, though I'm used to being mistaken for a 15-year-old. I graduated from college with a degree in economics and accounting, like my mom told me to. I was even going to look for a job in my major. Just like my mom said. Let her rest in peace. I feel sorry for her. She just didn't consult me when she married that asshole she trusts more than me. She's a nurse. She works shifts. She's on call a lot. Her new husband is a mechanic at the candy factory." Jordan looked thoughtfully at the red-haired girl. "He's always home in the evenings, And they don't bake cakes at night, Kayla continued. I warm up dinner for me and him at the same time. He'd grab me by the shoulders and then by the ribbon. Another day, I was lucky to get away with it. The guy took offense, warned me if I didn't get smarter. He'd kick me out of the house. She was quiet for a while. I hesitated, but decided to tell my mom after all. She has the right to know with whom she lives. Then she told me that I don't know anything about gratitude, that I was selfish. She raised me with such labor, and now I'm interfering with her happiness, which she waited for so long. Talking trash about her loving husband? Kayla took a deep breath. Maybe that would be the end of it for now. But she did ask Bill the question. He was quick to answer, I'm sorry, Charlotte. I didn't mean to upset you, but your daughter is deliberately provoking me, keeping me on my toes, just to keep us apart. Of course, it's not your fault she's grown up like this. You've worked hard to provide for her. Kayla grinned bitterly. There he was, the honorable one. He was without pretension. His mother believed him unconditionally, called me names, demanded I apologize to an offended Bill. I pretended to go to bed, packed my backpack with a couple changes of underwear and my papers and left. The only money I honestly took was my savings from my summer part-time job. Maybe it would have been wise to bring some things, but I couldn't. It would have made it look like I was worse than he was. She glared at Jordan. Are you thinking right now that this is just my cover story to get you off my back and rip you off? I mean, I'm homeless. Or at least to get money for a drink, for example. Well, I've definitely already got that look. Do you have somewhere to go? Or just so vagabonding out of principle and love of art? She smiled sadly. Did you like it? Jordan asked himself, catching the funny thought that for some reason he believed this girl. I'm stupid, of course, but not that stupid, she explained. What's there to like about it? Not unless it was somewhere near warm seas and then in Europe. Jordan listened attentively to Kayla's story. That's until October, she continued. Where did you get this knowledge? You been to warm seas? No, of course not. I haven't earned it yet. I've just been reading a lot. I want to travel someday. Not as extreme as I am now, of course. Kayla was quiet for a moment. I forgot to ask, where is my point of departure from? Tiva region, Staritsa station. I decided to go to Podporozhye. My father and his new family live there. They have a house. We haven't talked for a long time, but I thought he wouldn't mind taking me in, at least for the first time, until I find some work in St. Petersburg. Everything is more expensive in Moscow, and I have no one there at all. She grinned bitterly. It was a stupid thing to do. I should have found out something beforehand, and I just went like a hedgehog in a fog. Of course, if I'd known my father's number, I would have called him. But I just took a chance. There is a house. My father is not here. He works on a rotational basis in the far north. The only people in the house are his wife and red-headed twin boys. I showed her the documents. She said she believed me I looked just like my father, and the boys have the same color hair as me. She was calm, no hysterics. She showed me the deeds to the house. All the property is registered to her. She told me that the house was her inheritance, and that they had a fair agreement with my father. He couldn't buy such a place, but he earns a lot of money for his family. And she just raises the kids, gardens, and waits for him. And there's no place for me here. She's not a charity worker. So I'm not coming. I'm going back to my mom's. Kayla sighed. Well, she said it much more politely than I'm saying it for short. I didn't have anything to object at all. She was right. She even left me overnight. She wasn't afraid I'd say something to my husband. In the morning, I just walked to the station. I don't know where I'm going next. I put off the decision until I got to the station, and some freaks on a moped speed past and snatched my backpack with my money, phone, and documents from me. Jordan listened carefully to Kayla's story. I was carrying it not behind my back, but in my hand for some reason, she continued. It was lucky that the passport was in my jacket pocket. When I showed it to my father's wife, I was too lazy to put it neatly back into my backpack. I can show you." The girl shoved the passport under Jordan's nose with a magician's gesture. "Nice to meet you." "Kimberly," she introduced herself. Jordan chuckled. Jordan. It was like a Brazilian soap opera. Twice Jordan. "That's kind of cool," he grinned. "I didn't realize that Bruce Willis watched soap operas," Kimberly said sweetly. Jordan replied. "There were tons of them on not too long ago. Mom used to watch them sometimes for recreation." He didn't react to the mention of Bruce Willis. "I figured you didn't go to the police so they wouldn't bring you home. You weren't seriously considering vagrancy, were you? She's not a stupid girl, but she's a fool. What do you think your prospects are on the street?" Jordan cut himself off abruptly. The girl was clearly not in the right state of mind to indoctrinate and moralize, and he took the tone of a job interview, and that was funny in its own way. "No, at least not decent ones," Kimberly said. "What am I supposed to do with you? I don't want to turn you in to the police. Leaving you here isn't an option. Do I have to bring the dog home with me?" "No, it's a 5-spot," the girl explained. "I fed her at the same store with sausages on the way to my father's house. She shadowed me, so I took her with me." "Do you have any work for me?" "Unskilled labor would be fine. I can clean and cook quite well. I don't know the cuisines of the world, but my borscht and dumplings are really good." "And you'd go to look at a workplace now?" Jordan chuckled. "Are you sure you're a fool, Kimberly girl, if you're not court scared? Mom was definitely only concerned with her personal life, not your upbringing, if she didn't instill in you that you shouldn't get in the car with strange men." Kimberly smiled. "Thank you, Captain Hindsight. I wouldn't get in with just anyone. It's just that not many people care. I didn't expect anyone to stand up for us at all. Not even to listen. What happens when someone helps me out and then listens to me? I think I can trust him." She looked at the gun. "Is that a hunting rifle?" "I can tell the difference. Grandpa hunted. Simple logic." Logical, Jordan smirked. "You must be hungry, huh?" "Some gas station hot dog I could eat," Kimberly admitted. She was quite cozy in the back seat, lying down as if she'd only slept on narrow cots or on long-distance trains all her life. 5, stretching her paws out on the mat, sometimes howled unexpectedly behind Jordan's back, but Kimberly slept as quietly as if she wasn't even there. She was from a normal family, albeit an incomplete one. Not a tramp or a bum, just a girl. Jordan was sure of it. He hadn't grown up at court himself. For 6 months now, he'd been thinking of hiring a housekeeper and putting her in the empty guest house. He didn't like big company in the house, so the guest house was empty. Everything you need to live there, and what you don't have, you can get in the main house. Most likely as an accountant, Kimberly is a rural college graduate. As an au pair, she's a good fit. It is unlikely that the candidates recommended by the housekeeper hiring agency will be fundamentally better. Kimberly, still not fully awake, cleared the air with the edge of her palm. "You just keep in mind that this will be the very first job I've ever had, apart from handing out flyers," Kimberly said. "And that's not to say that I'm entitled to any understanding or leniency, but that I have to chew everything in detail on a daily basis. And duties weekly, different little things for your own convenience, so that I do not have the slightest in front of my eyes and do not ask stupid questions. The more detailed the instruction, the better the result will be." "Are you a sensible girl at times?" Jordan snorted. "It just seems that way," Kimberly reassured him. "I just don't like trouble." "Okay, I'm convinced. I'll come up with detailed instructions for you," Jordan assured her. "I'll pay you what the market average is. Unless, of course, you disguise your duties." No way. A job's a job. Thank you. Are you really going to help me out? Even if you save me, you won't regret it. I'm responsible when you really have something to do. For some reason, Jordan expected that now she'd become more animated and start talking nonstop, spilling facts from her life. But she stared silently out the window, and after about 10 minutes, she fell asleep again. How many kilometers did she walk during the past day? Interesting. Kimberly lived and worked for the second month in a bright, almost always empty house near Pittsburgh, surrounded by deep, spacious forest, where she had managed to collect so many mushrooms that she even dried and froze a solid bunch for the winter. Of course, if there were to be a mistress and children here, the duties would become more complicated, but then people would need different qualifications. For now, Kimberly would do just fine. She'd given her employer fair warning that she'd try to change her life at the first opportunity. If he wanted to hire a real, permanent, and reliable housekeeper who would seriously get into the running of his house and garden housekeeping, it certainly wouldn't be Kimberly. But Jordan was liking everything so far. He hadn't picked on anything at all, had never once expressed a shadow of dissatisfaction with the female order. But he wasn't really happy about it either. Good, Jordan said, smiling fluently when he came back from the office or wherever. That's fine. At least she doesn't yell and demand to turn inside out of her own skin for her pennies. You're lucky. At least you have an adequate employer. Her friend Amelie was happy for Kimberly. No sooner had Kimberly agreed to live in Jordan's homestead guest house and run his simple household in the large main house than he immediately gave her a smartphone for work-related purposes, which could be used for personal use as well. Kimberly held out her doubts. Kimberly checked the elegant statuettes and fancy decorative candles in the living room over the fireplace every Friday and thought that the owner of the house had obviously counted on some other guests. If he'd bought all this stuff and put it here. It wasn't very well arranged, of course, so she rearranged it more nicely. He doesn't care, but it makes me feel good, Kimberly thought. She was even starting to get worried. Does he have any friends? No, those smiling, smooth-talking, or conversely reserved, wary business associates, but just friends who would call him Jordan and talk to him about something ordinary and interesting only to them. He often arrives over, though. Talking about the ordinary at that time is something few people would want to do, Kimberly reasoned. Talk to you about anything. Does your Jordan, other than your job or purely as a piece of furniture, see you? Her friends asked. He rarely does, but I don't feel like furniture, Kimberly answered without thinking. And this Friday, the landlord didn't return calls about the week's grocery shopping. He arrived much later than yesterday, at 3 a.m, and the car plowed at the same time as he did, as if on cue. Sleek, well-groomed brunette with coral nails on long and thin pearlescent fingers. She should have gone to bed quietly, having finished all her chores, instead of waiting for him like a fool, a complete idiot. She couldn't think of anything but the most common option. Kimberly berated herself for her miscalculation, but even more so for being so unpleasant about a surprise that she actually should be indifferent about the important visitors. Jordan usually called ahead of time and gave some specific orders, and these guests were completely unexpected. She didn't say anything back to Kimberly, just slid a blank stare at the greeting, like the girl with the paddle in the old park. Good. To Kimberly, that meant it was okay to act the same way. She hummed cozily and dissolved into the book. At least she could be sure that no one would bother her in her room until morning. She came home silently, as if she might wake someone there, and prepared to quietly take a bath and go to bed. If the dream hadn't been shaken up by the phone ringing unexpectedly. Kimberly didn't want to pick it up, but he insisted. Kimberly, Deputy Master Max exhaled almost patiently. Well, thank God, at least you are. Are you in your room or somewhere near Mr. Jordan? Sorry for the stupid question. His cell phone is unexpectedly disconnected at this time of day, and I need it now. I'm in my room, Kimberly replied. I know I have no right to ask you anything, especially in the middle of the night. and I wouldn't if it wasn't important. Look, I'm sorry, but there's a problem with the paperwork on the last big shipment. It just came up in the overnight shipment. So we have to do something about it. Please run if you can to the owner's house and hand Jordan's cell phone. You can reset it now and I'll call you back in 5 minutes. I can't explain to Max that Jordan's not alone. Suddenly something really global. Kimberly threw on a long, almost toe-length down jacket over her pajamas. The cocoon she'd bought with her first paycheck dipped her feet into her athletic boots and slipped quietly out the door. The front door of the master's house was, as usual, unlocked. Why, if the gate was locked, there was a panic alarm and video surveillance. Kimberly deliberately stomped rather loudly up the stairs to the second floor, where the master guest bedrooms were, so as not to catch the couple off guard. But it seemed that in those Indian Pathfinder boots she was never heard. There was a conversation going on outside the door, quite loud and lively for the time of night. "Where do you see the caprice, Jordan?" came a woman's voice. It was the usual request of a girl with a sense of dignity. I'm not a prude, and I understand men's physiological needs, as you've already seen. But the times of slave owners with concubines or barinas with serf girls are a little past. Since you're so conscientious and socially responsible that you can't fire her on the street, write this girl a perfect reference and pay for some, I don't know, VIP job search package through a domestic staffing agency. I have absolutely nothing personal towards her. May she have better luck elsewhere. I assure you, she doesn't care who she continues her career with. Let anyone's husband or boyfriend sleep with her, but not mine personally. No one's ever complained that I'm not making my position clear. Listen, Jordan's voice was calm, tired. I have no desire to offend you or Kimberly. I wonder if you're comparing us. A woman's voice responded with a gentle, lazy sneer. But the conversation was not destined to continue. Kimberly's cell phone rang in her down jacket pocket. It was Max, whom she'd forgotten about while standing under the door. She realized immediately that she was still standing there and started pounding on the door with her fist. And then she raised her voice. "Max has an emergency." Jordan opened the door almost immediately and slipped through the door as quickly as he could to keep her from looking into his bedroom. Kimberly slowly turned around and headed back out without waiting for comment. Ameli's friend was right. Things were going suspiciously well. It couldn't last. You can't get used to a good thing so it won't be so frustrating when it's over. Kimberly was the most sensible and practical of all the women, their friends and acquaintances. It pissed off the girls on the course with her complete lack of desire for romance, and few wanted to be friends with her. Kimberly shrugged and said everyone's different. And Ameli's practicality didn't get in the way at all. On the contrary, it's good to have such an unflappable person around. I must wait until morning sometime and call her, to advise her on where to go next. A dreary apathy came over Kimberly, endless, dragging like rubber. I wish I could cry. She'd slept very little. She didn't even know if she was dreaming. She just fell out of reality sometimes, and then came back in again. At 8 o'clock in the morning, she got out of bed and made coffee on the small gas stove. Settling down at the narrow table with a cup, she looked around for her phone to dial. Only now did she remember that Jordan had her cell phone. "I've lost my mind," Kimberly complained confusedly to Piglet, who was lying at her feet with a nonchalant face. It was as if their life and living had been clearly and successfully determined once and for all. "You have me stupid." Kimberly was very supportive of short conversations with the dog, nothing superfluous, just the gist of the question. The dog's answers can be figured out by herself. It's dog nonsense, of course, but it helps to look at the problem calmly and find a solution. "Don't get too involved in this therapy," Amelie advised Kimberly almost seriously. "It's better to make some acquaintances among people." That's easy for her to say. If she had a regular job, it would be different. But here it's like living in a nature reserve, comfortable, quiet, but completely deserted. Jordan, as it turned out, had never had any housekeepers or domestic helpers before. At least he'd had a cook come in. "Kimberly, I'm not really a foodie," Jordan explained carefully, neither offended nor angry at the question. "You see, I often come home at night, have business lunches during the day, and go to a restaurant with my partners in the evening. Quite often have to dine out. For other occasions, there is delivery. Now you're cooking for yourself. You're treating me. It's very good, by the way. Especially the beef chowders. So I'm not being greedy. I just didn't feel the need without servants. I started to think about cleanliness and order. Hiring you solved the problem. Everyone says it's much more cozy. I think so myself. Actually, to complain about work and life would be the height of insolence. My wife used to think this kind of work was something humiliating. One word for it, in a word, a servant. The creators of TV series distort reality for girls." Jordan smirked, noticing her first confusion and tension. "You're just like any other employee, except you're not an office worker, not a salesman. I'm house staff for now. If you don't like it at home, we'll find you something else. I've got plenty of openings." Kimberly was embarrassed to ask why he was helping her. Even the impeccably logical Amelie couldn't see any real reason. The girls unanimously dismissed the love story at once. "Of course, it was the most tempting, but it wouldn't work for us," Kimberly said with a confident snicker. "Jordan hadn't shown any interest in me as a girl. I'm more affectionate with my dog, Peter, than he is with me. Jordan didn't show the slightest hint of interest in my girlfriends, even in jest. The usual benevolent employer who is not too interested in the employee's personality, as long as her work suits her. Meals, he explained, were on him. It turns out that many people practice this for domestic staff. He gave me a card to buy groceries and household items. Controlled expenses for a week, then stopped. Jordan said, "You can spend more. If you really think you need to buy something for the house. Don't bug me about the little things, but for the big purchases, please consult me. You know, if you need a new washing machine or something." Kimberly hadn't heard a single nag from him. Now she honestly tried to remember again. Not a single one. It's unlikely she's that flawless at her job. It's probably just that Jordan's spoiled and unpretentious. "Look, there's only one viable theory," Amelie concluded. "The man probably came from a simple family and worked his way up. He has a simple outlook on life. Why not help the girl if it costs him nothing? It's good for the bottom line. Now Jordan's going to fire her, most likely. First of all, his friend didn't like her. Secondly, there was eavesdropping at the door, albeit accidentally, but still eavesdropping." No sooner had Kimberly crouched on the floor next to Pyrochka and thought about her next steps in life, covering the dog's head with her hands, than the doorbell rang briefly. "Come in." "Is it open?" Kimberly answered, trying to sound calm. Jordan entered, placing her cell phone on the table. "Here, I'll give it back. Max and I made you uncomfortable. It's rare, but it happens sometimes. If it happens again, you'll understand. It's a work thing. I never turn my phone off at night. But sometimes it has a life of its own, so it went off at the wrong time. Anyway, I'm sorry." "I'm sorry too," Kimberly heard her own voice. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation. I was just confused when I realized it was about me. If you need me, I'll leave without a problem. Don't keep me here out of pity. You've been so helpful. My friends didn't believe me at first, that this could just happen. I'm okay with my citizenship, my registration, and my specialty, so I won't be lost. There are people in much worse situations." "I don't know what Kimberly was imagining, but I don't want to get into it," Jordan said tiredly, even grimly. Jordan said, "I just thought I had found someone for a serious relationship. But it turns out I was just imagining things. And you just work your ass off and keep it simple." Kimberly had noticed that he had a habit of fiddling with various objects in his hands, his phone, glasses, a pen, when he was thinking about something. Now he picked up a thin sketchbook from the dining room table, the kind they usually buy for first graders. He opened it, leafed through it, and perked up. "Oh, this is drawn with a regular pencil. Is that how you know how to do it, and you don't say anything? We did not ask about your hobbies?" He blurted out. The first thing that came to mind. The 5 is like a living person, and her character is conveyed. I look so good only after a vacation, when I am on the beach in the Dominican Republic. Disconnect from everything. Max is handsome and a crook. What's it really like? The chief accountant, but once you've seen him, it's like you've known him your whole life. Listen, you have a talent. That's me, no kidding. For the first time, Kimberly realized the real meaning of the phrase. Almost falling through the cracks, she was quite decent at taking criticism and complaints, did not go after words and quarrels, but she was not used to praise and was lost, as if on an alien planet. It's her own fault, she thought, scattering her personal belongings around as if intent on being found. Of course, if Jordan were more curious, he'd be interested. There's no telling what could be in there. Just because she doesn't have her own property doesn't mean she can't have her own secrets. And he sees everything around here as his. And in his position, that's normal, I guess. Jordan's casual voice brought her back to earth from her world of thought. I went to the central warehouse, then to the office, and the guests took a cab. And don't worry, it's unlikely you'll see any more of them here. See you tonight. He nodded and left. 5 immediately took a deep breath. Kimberly exhaled loudly and was surprised to catch herself feeling happy. Arrogant, haughty Sabrina had imagined in vain that she'd found someone she could twirl around so easily. Jordan said, "She'll have to start looking again. She won't be alone for long. She's too pretty. I'd like to paint someone in some ancient Roman outfit and against a backdrop of rapeseed hills." Until recently, Jordan had hardly ever wondered whether he was lucky or unlucky in his personal life. It hadn't seemed like anything important at all. It'll all catch up later. It's never too late to catch up, he thought. There were always some more important things to do, requiring full immersion and dedication. So there wasn't enough resource for a full-fledged relationship. He was squeamish about professional women. The most expensive escort girls for him were no different from those girls who sit with truckers for one flight. Max tried to change the chief's mind, wanting to involve him in his favorite leisure activity. But he got tired and abandoned his idea. Of course, Jordan had had resort romances. Any of them was pleasant to remember, and he didn't want to continue when the vacation relaxation ended. Max's envy. The boss was a success with spectacular, wealthy, and self-sufficient girls, whose lives were too rich and interesting in themselves to be locked in the search for a promising permanent man. In such relationships, no one suffers. They are just for fun and the joy of living. Jordan was happy with his own way of life. If only his parents didn't think he was living wrong and didn't remind him of it. Even his always understanding mother. As soon as the clock struck your 30th birthday, the situation began to change insidiously. Slowly but inexorably. Even yesterday, unconditionally proud of her son, who achieved a lot on his own because he was not distracted by nonsense. And suddenly declared that all this is not too valuable, if for no one, as for no one. Mom, after all, you and your father have a house, 2 cars, you've started to see the world. And I look at you and I'm happy that I was able to provide you with a normal life. It's all great, Jordan. We're proud and we enjoy it. But without all of that, we'd still be doing fine. And seeing you happy is the most important thing to Nicholas and I. Jordan said. Helpful, but you don't look unhappy. Do you agree? He smiled complacently. I know my business and I love my parents' house. I have a place to come. I have a close friend. Yes, just Alex, but I don't need more, you know me. I haven't met someone I want to be around every day. I can't get married just because the time is right, especially since no one gets married as early as they did 30 years ago. Yes, I understand Virginia sighed, feigning marital sadness. Or rather, it was easier for Jordan to think she was faking something. One day he overheard his parents talking and realized that they were quite seriously worried. "Nicholas, it's already occurring to me that Jordan still remembers Naomi, which is why he can't find someone else. It happens sometimes. Remember my great-uncle Bill? A classmate of his once didn't wait for him to get out of the army. To other people, it's such bullshit, childish love. He died a childless bachelor. Well, while he was young, he had his perks. But when he got old, he became untouchable. It's depressing." He was starting to worry more and more that Jordan might be like that. And you've given yourself something to worry about, and you brought Uncle Bill into it. Jordan's not like him at all, is he? Not at all. He doesn't remember Naomi from a long time ago. He's making money. He's making a lot of money. He's got a couple years to go. That's normal for a guy. What did he see? While he was setting up his business. One thing he's seen, after a while of partying, he'll want a family. I'd like a grandson or a granddaughter myself, if it wasn't named Benjamin. Jordan felt guilty, even though he knew it wasn't his fault. He'd made his mother worry, even though he didn't want to. It was a stupid story. Is Dad right? Naomi. He hasn't thought about her in a couple years. She faded into oblivion and got lost. Naomi was his childhood classmate's girlfriend, really like the legendary Uncle Bill, the only perpetual bachelor in Mom's large family. Jordan said. Naomi came to their school in 3rd grade. Her mother had divorced her husband and returned with her daughter to her parents' home from another lumber mill town. The girls were mostly tough and boisterous and perky. They were freezing at their desks, giggling and whispering. When the teacher announced this as Naomi Woods, she'll be studying with us, Naomi was graceful, somehow very quiet and really light in the truest sense, with soft long hair and big blue eyes. A princess from a fairy tale, the most corny princess, just a paragon. Jordan was an excellent student, but not some nerd, but an athlete and a recognized leader in the class. That day his roommate had the flu, and the new girl was seated next to Jordan. He didn't say or do anything special. But from that day on, they became friends, and were soon seen as inseparable, a couple. Sometimes girls who are beautiful as children grow into the most ordinary girls. But Naomi was not one of them. She grew up to be a real beauty. The most ordinary t-shirts from the local market looked like those from an expensive boutique. At least that's how she seemed to everyone around her at the time. None of the girls even challenged her superiority. It was considered a useless thing, and she was so easy, harmless, and charming that she had no enemies. And it was not interesting to gossip about her. For a township beauty, that was very strange. Naomi, Tiffany's mother, was friends with Jordan and her mother and did not hide her joy that her daughter had such a serious, reliable fiancé. On top of being an athlete and handsome Jordan. But Mom did not know whether to be happy. The girl was very bright. But she doesn't have a lot of whimsy. I can't find anything to fault in your Naomi. And this is very suspicious, she laughed, though she was not quite joking. The chief accountant of the timber processing plant knew all the local manners very well. Evil gossip from boredom, stupid connections from the same boredom. Naomi was different, as if she hadn't grown up here. She had no special talents, except for her natural appearance. They finished high school. Naomi had little interest in her studies. She was always an average student. She didn't seem to have any big career ambitions, so she just went to hairdressing college closer to home. Eyes glowing. Pretty and outgoing. She has great taste, and such a master is always more willing to go to the clientele than to some old, approved her choice of her mother. She wouldn't get lost in New York either. Jordan went to New York and immediately entered the university with a military department. as planned in the 9th grade. At the General Family Council, it was seriously discussed that he would finish his studies, find a job, establish himself in New York, and then take Naomi. Tiffany, Naomi's mother, was very worried about whether Jordan in New York will not find another, and constantly sent to the house Collins to keep abreast of personal life. She liked to anticipate everything. Beauty is beauty, but there will always be someone even brighter. The university is probably full of girls who grew up in urban families, theaters and museums, with whom Jordan may seem more interesting, shared Tiffany with her daughter, but immediately encouraged her not to get upset. It's okay. You just have to show that you're loyal and decent. That's rare nowadays, especially with your looks. They marry that kind of guy. Jordan's gonna do great things in life. You don't have to be a fortune teller. He'll dress you up and show you the world. Girls are young, foolish, and throw good guys away. They think there'll be plenty of them, but there really won't be, her mother insinuated, looking very convincing. Naomi's wait for Jordan was flawless. It was like she wasn't interested in other guys at all. Serious girl. I didn't expect her to be. Nicholas complimented her once. You know, Nick, if she went to a big city and acted like that, that would be class. But here, and who to look at, who to choose from. Guys who want to make it, they leave. Well, I didn't leave once, Nicholas objected. We still had a different upbringing. Tiffany diplomatically justified her husband, who was already regretting having touched on the slippery subject. And she quickly turned the conversation to the topic she had chosen about Naomi. And my future daughter-in-law doesn't even need to look for anyone. She already has a ready and responsible Jordan. All she has to do is just sweep the less than ideal candidates aside. You're going to be a nasty mother-in-law, aren't you? Her husband raised his eyebrows with a sly smile. Am I a good mother-in-law? Tiffany cut him off with a joking threat and waved a piece of food in front of his nose. And she laughed. And whoever doubts it will be bad. Vacation? Jordan had always come home for the first 2 years, but on weekends and short holidays, Naomi had traveled to New York to see him whenever possible. He was already struggling to balance school and work. And Naomi did banquet, wedding hairstyles at home, and she had much more free time. Conductors of trains Boston, New York quickly remembered the fragile, airy blonde, with which followed on the road voluminous bags, bulks with home-made preparations, cabbage and especially pickled and salted mushrooms, which are so fond of her boyfriend. These trips were interesting, and had been from the beginning, when she and Jordan spent evenings together. But they became even more interesting a year and a half later, when Jordan began to make friends and acquaintances in New York, with whom they could spend. The guys emailed the stories to me, and I thought I'd print them out from my scrapbook. Isn't she worse than Lady Di? Almost indifferently, without mocking, Ashley said, glancing at the beautiful pictures, a crown prince and a glamorous pussycat. Tiffany, what would you like me to say? I'm glad everything happened now, that my son and your daughter didn't have time to get married and have a baby. Jordan's illness was physically hard and agonizing, long and tiring. The medical profession would say he had a chronic illness. He himself never said a bad word about his frustrated other half, nor would he allow anyone to say a bad word about him. And he would not dare to just quietly go through all this and no longer have any relationship that pretends to be close and touching. Not out of principle, not on purpose. It just happened by itself. An invisible armor grew. He didn't make friends either, only useful business acquaintances. His only friend was his classmate Alex, a bookworm and part-time snowboarder and extreme mountaineer. As soon as he unexpectedly broke up with Sabrina, things suddenly went great. Clearly the events are unrelated, but it's funny. He's never liked the stupid saying about the woman with the wagon, but it fits his and Sabrina's relationship perfectly. As Alex says, secret and stubborn cause and effect. In fact, you should thank your girlfriend that everything turned out so well for you, dear Chief, Max said confidentially. He was determined to develop his thought, but the chief was not inclined to do so. "And let's make a deal. You will not call my wife the chosen one. I do not call so constantly changing secretaries of your administrative department. You're not a born deputy general with a hereditary title either." Almost 6 months have passed, April has come, and spring is already tangible in coastal resorts. Pyatorochka found out on a short walk that they have hog game hunters in their neighbors. The girls themselves, if Kimberly was to be believed, didn't want to eat any downed wild birds, but the hunters and their four-legged companions didn't interact smoothly. Big and shaggy five frolicked in the company of elegant and expensive hunting dogs, prize winners and champions of all kinds of exhibitions. She turned out to be completely non-aggressive and very friendly. "My puppy has grown so much," Kimberly laughed. Each of the nearest neighbors, whom Jordan had never really known before, because he had no time to get to know them, now had a pencil portrait of a dog with children over the fireplace, or in a cozy corner of the bedroom, or a dog with his wife and children, or a dog with his beloved, respected owner in his office, against a backdrop of racks of books or a stuffed grouse, or portraits of all the family dogs and cats without wife and children, and in any combination desired. Because at home, Jordan's ruler was Kimberly Chigarin, an aspiring graphic artist who just lacked a lot of theoretical knowledge so far. So she was still studying and at the same time working at a job that did not interfere with her studies. Kimberly began to draw avidly when the art expert, who agreed to look at her work, dug up from somewhere, and at the request of the chief obligingly, then Max, discreetly approved. "Fresh, original. Where did you study?" "Accounting college." "It happens, as much as you want," authoritatively hummed the maitre d'. "A vocation. Now it is necessary to study." After giving her detailed recommendations, the expert and the master went to the greenhouse. There, among citrus trees, Jordan had a cozy corner where he sometimes treated his guests with cognac or whiskey. Kimberly went to her cabin, quietly turned the key in the lock, sat by the window, and suddenly cried silently. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been so stupidly upset. It must have been back in high school. The tears were light, not bitter, not even stinging her eyes. If Mom could hear what the professor, the gallery owner, was saying now. There's no reason for him to lie. He might well have hinted to the ruler of the house to improve herself better in the art of wet cleaning, or try to get a job as an assistant primary accountant, since she has a specialty. Kimberly thought. The memory brought back to mind the conversation with her mom before the high school prom. "Kimberly, I'll say it again, and I won't say it again. Yes, while I feed and clothe you, I will decide where you should go to school." "That's not fair. It's my life. You're not going to feed me for the rest of my life and then have me live and suffer through a job I don't like you. My favorite job is the one that allowed me to raise you. So don't get smart. You all think you're smarter than your mothers at this age. Don't look at me like you have a wicked witch for a mother. If you had a rich daddy who was willing to support you and give you a head start in life, it would be different. You'd think I'd feel sorry for you. Then you can do whatever fine arts you want. You're a nurse's daughter, a divorcee with a penniless alimony check. You need a profession that will always feed you. Accountants are needed everywhere. They start making good money pretty quickly. They don't have night shifts and wash old lady patients. Holly, my classmate, works remotely, running several small firms. Nice thing, a cat on your lap and no annoying bossy faces. You'd think she'd be a star in the sky. She's a straight A student, just like me. Kimberly, the daughter of Vaznetsov and Rapin. There's only a few of them. Nobody needs a painter from the word thin, and accountants of average level will find their stable job. Here you will be lucky to marry well, and then do what you want, if your husband will agree to provide for you. Until then, it's just like I said. Kimberly thought, I wonder how Mom is doing now, as if she never had a daughter. After a month of living near Pittsburgh, Kimberly asked Amelie to let her mother know where she was and how she was doing. Amelie told her briefly in general terms that not all is well. Kimberly works as an au pair with room and board. The pay is good. Just before New Year's Eve, Kimberly plucked up the courage to call her mom. "Happy New Year, Mommy. Happy and healthy. You're doing fine. You're not on call at home for New Year's Eve. Thank you, my daughter. Happy New Year. Bill and I had some guests over. I'm not really comfortable socializing. Why don't we call again the day after tomorrow?" Okay, Kimberly agreed, knowing she wouldn't call back the day after tomorrow. "If anything, I call from my number. It's my regular number," she said. "Yeah, Happy New Year." Mom quickly said goodbye, hurrying back to her interesting conversations. Kimberly had a strange New Year's Eve, but not a bad one. Jordan had gone to stay with his parents somewhere in the northern village. Kimberly was silently surprised that they didn't want to come to New Year's Eve Pittsburgh themselves, but didn't say anything. As they drove away, Jordan asked what his housekeeper was going to do on New Year's Eve. Wouldn't she be scared on her own? With a fence like that and an alarm system like that, of course not. "I once already spent New Year's Eve alone, when my mother had to suddenly replace a sick colleague on New Year's Eve. My girlfriends had left. I didn't have time to make arrangements with anyone. It was nothing special to meet." "That's true. But it's kind of sad," Jordan remarked. "I'll let you invite some of your girlfriends onto your turf." Kimberly invited Monica. Amelie got a boyfriend. It was a big deal. She was invited to spend New Year's Eve with his family. Monica asked her father for a train ticket to Pittsburgh as a gift, and spent the holiday with a friend. All morning and afternoon on December 31st, the girls walked around the city, and by evening came to feast in the same house. "You got a cozy place here?" Monica cheerfully approved. "And in general romance, artistic taste to transform any old lady guard. Who's that?" She looked at the women in pencil drawings and became interested in Max's portrait. "That's Jordan's chief deputy. A womanizer and a slippery character," Monica said confidently. "Dodgy, smart," Kimberly agreed. "Aha, it's true. My friend is a witch. I wish she was, but she's not, unfortunately. It's just a talent you have. I've always said that, in case you remember." "Who's that character that looks like Luke Evans?" Monica asked, pointing to the portrait. "That's Jordan, the owner of the manor," Kimberly replied. Monica said. That short comment meant that she liked the person of the opposite sex. "Now I'm wondering if I should run away from home to be rescued by a gentleman like that." "Monica, that's not funny," Kimberly countered. "It wasn't until I woke up here this morning that I realized what could have happened, and how lucky I was that Jordan was there. So I wouldn't recommend running away." "Unreliable lottery," Kimberly said. "Come on, you're being a little too serious. Running away is definitely not my thing. I like comfort." "And I'm a coward," Monica said. "And your boss is really cute." "He has a busy personal life," Kimberly said. "Because I don't care about his personal life. I won't gossip about him. He's polite. His demands are impossible. He pays well for his work. Even though I'm inexperienced, he brought in art critics to evaluate my sketches. It's already too good, don't you agree? After studying to be an accountant, and after my mom's bankruptcy." They were silent for a while, meaningfully looking at the decoration of the house. "Wow, New Year's Eve, and this conversation seemed like yesterday, and it's already April," Monica said. Kimberly worked weekends, took regular painting and drawing lessons, and was passionate about other aspects of her life. In general, she gave very little thought to it. But on the first really warm day, when it was clear that winter wasn't coming back, Jordan knocked on the cabin in the evening and asked her a puzzling question. "Why didn't you remind me? You've been working for me for over 6 months. You should be on vacation by now. 2 weeks. Everything's blooming in the south. Go on a plein air painting trip somewhere. What's it called? Think before tomorrow, what date do you want to go on vacation? We'll agree tonight." He's withdrawn today and left with a really tired gait. It's easy for him to talk about the South. Kimberly had no idea where to go to get enough money for the winter and where it would be nice and not too crowded. She'd even managed to save some money after she'd paid her tuition, because she didn't have to pay for food and lodging. She'd never been farther than her hometown, except for a school field trip to Washington, D.C., after 9th grade. And she always wanted to travel when she dared to dream and imagine her life was going well. Those dreams always involved traveling, having to be honest with her boss that she needed advice. She never got to ask Jordan about the delights of the South. The next day he came home. Unexpectedly early, at 7 o'clock in the evening, he suddenly knocked on the door of the cabin and asked, "May I sit down here, have a talk?" Kimberly was confused by his different appearance and silently pointed to a chair. "Kimberly, would you understand if your vacation had to be pushed back a little?" Jordan said. "No problem at all," Kimberly admitted. "I didn't realize I was entitled to one. Not if you hadn't suggested it." "You're on the payroll," Jordan reminded her tiredly. "We have to do something about your legal illiteracy." "We will," Kimberly said. "We'll do it later. Do you need help now?" "My parents are coming to visit. Do you want them to feel comfortable while I work?" Kimberly nodded, and for some reason she pictured Naomi's squeamish face just a little from the side, and a tenacious, finicky gaze watching her every move. That is to say, act casual, so good-natured, the boss advised, as if he'd read her thoughts on her face. "You just imagined someone else, not my parents. They lived their whole life in the forestry farm. Ordinary good people from the provinces, without stupid shouting ponchos. My father developed heart problems. Only now it turns out he'd had the alarm bells before. But he didn't tell anyone. He thought it would settle down somehow, but it didn't. They've been recommended a good specialist. I'll arrange it all here. And my dad needs some positive vibes right now. Who knows how long he has left? It's scary to say, but with his diagnosis, it's best not to be self-delusional." "My request may seem strange and absurd to you," Jordan continued. "You can say no, I understand. My dad and mom really want me to get married. My mom's openly pecking at me already. My father is more silent out of male solidarity, but in recent years he's also worried, according to my mom. If you agree to play along, I'll introduce you as my fiancée," Jordan continued. "It will make them so happy that such joy will help them through life's difficulties. Make a lot of things seem like nothing. Don't say no right away. Think about it. It's important to me. I would never have asked for anything beyond your job description if it weren't for these circumstances." Jordan was tensely silent, waiting. Kimberly realized that the ball was in her court, and she had to answer now and in a straightforward manner. "I have to concentrate to get my point across," she excused herself. "I see your point. Lying for the greater good, after all. But the first objection. What do we do next? All right, you and I will play bride and groom. Father will be pleased. But there's still no wedding. And we don't know when it'll happen. Making up a separation, even a peaceful one. He'll be even more upset by such hopes. It's not good for him. You're going to have to really look for a real bride to fix this. And you can't always find one quickly. You know better than me." To the first objection, "I'm used to dealing with problems as they come," Jordan said. "As they say, if we're scared, we'll be scared. The course of events can draw further strategy. Right now, I just want to give my father and mother the strength to live." "The second objection is that I'm not a good candidate," Kimberly continued. "You're a wealthy man, Jordan. And I'm not the bride of a wealthy man. Your parents probably envision a girl from a so-called good family, if not a businesswoman. You can't say that about me. You, with all your intelligence, can just not understand it, do not see the obvious signs, but your mom will. This isn't business. It takes a whole different kind of instinct. Jordan's eyebrows went up in surprise, and for the first time that evening he grinned confusedly. That's the depths of psychology. I like your thoughtful approach to the task. And now I have more and more confidence that you can do it, and my parents will really like you. Well, there's all kinds of actresses, Kimberly said with a final argument. Not all stars are high paid. A lot of people need roles and will play Jacqueline Kennedy if they have to. Dad and Mom would be scared of Jacqueline Kennedy, Jordan said tiredly. They'd love a girl like you. I'm not even going to explain why I'm not interested in this right now. You don't have to play anything. Just act normal. Just remember we're in a relationship. I promise I won't get into character enough to let you get too affectionate. But if I just hold your hand, it's no big deal. Besides, my parents are a little old-fashioned, and they don't recognize hugging in public or anything like that. Help me out, please, Jordan asked. Take a month's vacation, wherever you choose, and I'll pay for everything and clean up before you get there, so you don't have to clean up a month's worth of messes. Okay, fine, I'll do my best, Kimberly said, immediately regretting what she'd said. It's like jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge into the water, she thought. Just tell me more about your parents, and show me pictures of your childhood, she continued. It's strange when a groom doesn't tell his bride about his family. The more I know, the more chances for a successful role. When are your parents arriving? The day after tomorrow. In the evening we meet them, send their things home with the driver, and we go to dinner, get acquainted, celebrate the meeting, make plans. My parents will be here for a week. You and I are both visiting. So you'll have to rethink your daily routine, sleep longer, and by no means grab your usual chores, thinking it's the beginning of a vacation. Stupid. Why did you say yes when you should have said no right away? I'm in a panic. It would have gotten out of hand, Kimberly thought. He wasn't sure I'd agree. 50-50. I can't even tell my friends. They'd only scare me more. There's not much time. It was too late for regrets. You just had to tune in. That's all. Kimberly tuned in. She drew from the photograph a sturdy fisherman with short, wiry gray hair and clear eyes. The man had his arm around the shoulders of a small, round-faced woman proudly holding a huge mustached catfish by the gills, its tail reaching to the ground. A beautiful photograph, though taken by an amateur. Banal, everyday subjects can be very beautiful, her teacher had recently said. A favorite subject put her in a relaxed mood. I actually owe Jordan a lot, Kimberly thought. So if I have the opportunity to do something for him, I should do it, not speculate. Everything was going great, just like it had. Kimberly could feel it. Was she shaking like that for nothing? Maybe she wasn't. Seeing her excitement, which she couldn't hide, Nicholas and her parents did everything they could to make things easier for her. Let's just have a nice evening, Kimberly Ashley asked quietly in the cozy, darkened lobby of the country restaurant where they'd come for dinner. The men went to choose wine, and they lingered in front of the mirror. Can we use you? Please? I don't want anything formal. I want to forget about Nicholas's health fears and think about the future. A pleasant future. So don't try to please us. You know how I rehearsed the meeting with my future mother-in-law, Ashley continued. Nicholas was very attentive to his mother, and I wanted to seem good so that she would approve of me. I forgot my role out of fear, of course, and seemed like a complete fool. She probably even doubted that I was able to study to be an accountant. It's funny now. I went to accounting school, too. Kimberly suddenly felt like sharing. But I don't think I can bring myself to work in that specialty. It's not my thing. I just gave in to my mom and finished college. Not liking a job spoils a woman's character, Jordan's mother said. I like accounting, or I would have quit it a long time ago, no matter what anyone said. Jordan told us on the phone that you paint, that you have a natural talent. You just have to keep studying, Frank said. And he filmed some of your work and emailed it to us. My mother and I looked at them so much we almost missed the train. These dogs, cats, children, they're all so lifelike you could write stories about them. And when I saw Jordan's portrait, I was so relieved. Well, he's lucky at last. He's not being lied to. I can tell you love my son. I may not be an art historian, but that's the only way you can paint with love. It's not just about talent. I'm embarrassing you. Let's go see our boys. If Ashley hadn't led Kimberly by the hand, she wouldn't have seen where she was going. Her legs felt wobbly from the confusion. It was a good thing she was wearing low-heeled shoes and not high stilettos, or she'd have lost her footing. Of course, Kimberly forbade herself to think about it, shrugging off any suspicious thought. But she loved Jordan. Ashley had several dozen portraits of his son, 48 of them in different seasons, moods, and settings. All painted from memory, all safely stored at the bottom of her dresser, so her husband wouldn't accidentally see something he shouldn't. Kimberly was sure that even when she left his house for good, she would continue this series of portraits. For a long, long time, but always in secret. These works would never appear in her exhibitions. And today's conversation with her father, she will definitely write how they sit opposite each other. So similar and dissimilar at the same time, but both beautiful and happy. Can't be upset, can't spoil the evening, Kimberly told herself. I'll think of my silly feelings as a creative stimulus. I'm supposed to have unrequited passions. Since I'm all bohemian now, she tried to joke to herself. On a small dance floor in front of the restaurant fireplace, a very interesting couple was twirling in a slow dance. A sturdy, stately, gray-haired man moved not too dexterously. It was evident that he had not danced often in his life, but he was glowing with quiet joy and was not at all embarrassed by his lack of skill. His partner was a thin, red-haired girl in an elegant birch dress, a little confused, with a sad smile, but happy eyes. Don't be only dry with her. You'll die. Frank took the moment to speak to his son, while the couple danced and they were alone at the table. You have her so defenseless and so much younger. You're taking on a lot of responsibility. You won't let her down. I like Kimberly a lot, Jordan replied. I won't let you hurt her. She's such a girl. How shall I put it? Sophisticated, Ashley said suddenly. Jordan was glad he'd found the word. It was true. He just hadn't had time to realize what he'd noticed long ago. For a simpleton like me, she needs expensive dresses, a fireplace, a beautiful entourage. Hello, Alex, sang a familiar low, velvety voice behind me. Oh, hi, Mom, he said. I'll leave for 5 minutes. I'll talk to a friend. You won't miss me. He nodded quickly at Sabrina and almost forcibly took her away before her mother could realize it. My friend and I stopped for dinner, Sabrina said, stepping out onto the open porch. I see Alex is in interesting company. You could introduce her to her mom. I wouldn't say anything bad about you to her, she said with a snowy sneer. Only good things. I'm not sorry. I don't see why you should be nervous. You've always been so calm before. Did your affair with the young housekeeper wear you out so much? The girl's so cranky. I joined and decided to tell my father, Alex said coldly. Of course it will please him, but at his age you should be more careful. Think about your health. What was the purpose of what you said? He exhaled stiffly, trying to sound calm. We girls sometimes act without purpose. Naomi's carefree, tinkling voice came instead of Sabrina's. It was just hurtful to the girl. Very hurt. Yes, sweetheart. I think it's disrespectful to your parents to make them spend their evenings in the company of your roommate, your housekeeper. You have to separate those aspects of your life, Sabrina said. That's what I wanted to say to Alex as, shall we say, an old friend. What did you say? Naomi heard everything perfectly well. To think of it, the housekeeper. Her eyes lit up with joyous excitement. What a woe. Are we ashamed to dishonor our family by sitting at the same table with her? I don't know where you were brought up, but it's no surprise that people get acquainted at work and girls marry their bosses. I'm determined to have a good evening and have no intention of hearing nasty things about my future daughter-in-law. All the best. Sabrina politely sang to her mother and hurriedly disappeared into the semi-darkness of the hall without showing any emotion. What a phrase. Ashley blurted out angrily. And you're good too. What do you take me and my father for? Did you think we'd be against a daughter-in-law who worked for you as an au pair? Up to 1,000 girls take such jobs while they're studying waitresses, hotel maids. More than half of them are students. You know that, don't you? I like to talk, and I get to know everyone on vacation, so I know what I'm talking about. To avoid embarrassing Kimberly, I'm going to keep my mouth shut for now. She's nervous enough as it is. Poor girl. Let's go over there. Your daddy must have had a lot to eat while I was gone. He danced and worked up an appetite, and he'll take care of him later. They got home so late that all they had to do was feed the dogs and go to bed. Frank had to go for his first checkup by noon tomorrow. Kimberly couldn't figure out whether she wanted or feared to be alone in her cabin. To remember once more the details of this evening and somewhere find the strength to play her part again tomorrow, may Frank get better. And we can think about finding a clever way out later. It'll be something to remember if she ever has a daughter. She'll show her a few dozen portraits of the same man and tell her the story. Rosemary slowed down her perpetual motion machine a bit when she managed to talk her husband into going to bed. That's it, boys. You finally waited until you were alone, she said. You've had enough of us today, and we'll be here for the rest of the week. Good night, darlings. Frank and Rosemary closed the guest bedroom door behind them, and Kimberly and Jordan went out onto the porch. It was so quiet in the garden that they could hear dogs barking in the distance. Did you get along well in this garden? Kimberly asked, trying to sound calm and reasonable. Am I doing all right so far? It's been wonderful, Jordan assured her in a strangely warm voice. Only thanks to your... Oh, sorry, your parents are so easy to deal with. It's hard for me to switch. I'm a little tired. No, I was going to ask you myself, he said. Let's go, you don't look at me. Only at me like a jerk, after what I'm about to say. If I don't say it, I might miss a very important opportunity. And I don't usually do that. Let's really be together. It's not for fun. Not out of boredom. I want to see you every day, and I won't get bored. What do you say to that? I don't like it like this at all. Kimberly nodded her head quietly toward her cabin. Come on, I'll show you 48 of your portraits. I'll even give you one if you like it.